Hey everyone.
Hello, we are officially live on Facebook. How is everybody doing this evening?
Great.
Doing well, thank you.
Wonderful. Good. We do have viewers that have already started tuning in, so that is great that the news is out there. No pressure.
Mhm.
Don't get nervous that people are watching you. So let's just get started with some introductions so everybody can get to know you if they don't know you already, which I seriously doubt they don't know you already, but why don't we go ahead and start with some introductions? Your Grace, Mark, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, so I was just going to introduce the purpose of the chat today. Um, None of us are particularly large by kind of average American standards, and in the SEA, we're all considered way below average. I joke that I'm SEA size puny, and so we do have a lot of people ask us about tactics and strategy and power generation and how to deal with the big giant people. And so we started comparing notes and came up with some ideas and wanted to share that with everybody. In terms of introductions, my name is Marc de Arundel. I'm a knight and a duke out of the West Kingdom. Um, I am 5'11", and the lightest I've ever fought in the SEA is about 165 pounds. I'm currently about 185. So again, I'm pretty average for North Americans, but we joke that I'm SEA size puny. Uh, my senior squire has 4 inches and 60 pounds on me, so I'm used to being kind of undersized. But that's kind of me and why I'm here.
Okay. My name is Kelly Long. I'm in the SA Jarl Thorfinn the Cruel. I don't know. I don't know. I'm like 5'8", 5'9", something like that. I don't even know actually. And so in the SA, yeah, that's actually not a very large person in the real world. Kind of an average sized person. But I've been fighting for 30 years, and I've had to adapt to stay competitive in this world. So there you go. And I look forward to talking to you guys about some of the things that I've had to do. So there you go.
Hey, I'm Sir Eva von Danzig from the Kingdom of Lockhart, so that's situated in Australia, New Zealand. I am 5'8", and I haven't taken my pandemic weight, but I usually range between 165 to 175 pounds. My predominant style is center grip, heater, and sword. And one of the things that I often say to people is, like, if I could make it to knighthood, anybody has a good shot, because when I first started, like, I couldn't throw a single blow with any power. It took about a year for me to sort of nail down the mechanic to make it work. And I wasn't particularly fit when I started. Like, I was like the chubby kid. I started fighting at 16. I got authorized. So I didn't have any of the natural graces, but, I worked really hard and learned some really good principles to get me where I am.
Great introductions. Well, I guess we'll just dive right in then. Speaking of strategies and approaches that somebody would take in and mine as well. I'm only 5'4", so this is really helpful for me too. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to your Grace, Mark.
Thanks. So one of the things I wanted to lead with, because when we put the document that goes along with this chat out, we got some people chiming in that were fought with different weapons forms or were bigger. And then some of them were very smaller. And I want to be clear that the stuff we're going to talk about today should be applicable for everyone, because we're trying very hard to just talk about good fighting. But it is a mistake to look at your physical attributes and to allow them to define your fighting. And that's regardless of your size. I know just as many big, strong guys who in their head, I'm the big, strong guy, I'm a smash. And they weren't able to kind of get out of their own mental box and start using speed and some sneaky tricks and things like that. So their idea of their kind of physical attributes got in the way of their progression as a fighter. And that goes if you're strong or fast as well. When I was coming up, I was very fast, and so I tried to rely on that, and I hit a shelf or a ceiling, of fighters that I could not beat no matter how fast I was, because they were just better than I was, and they would think it was adorable as I zipped around the field, and then they just smashed me. Actually, Thorfinn is one of them. As I was coming up, I had a lot of speed, but he had a lot more trickiness and experience than I did, so he smashed me pretty good on the way up. So the thing is the most important thing in a fight is control, and whether the other person has a range or reach advantage or a weight advantage or power advantage, if you can control where and when those fights are happening and kill people in the transitions, that's going to serve you regardless of the size difference. So when I approach someone that has more reach than I do, and I'm sorry, I have to take a minute to say that there is a difference between reach and range, right? Somebody can have a very long reach. They could be tall, they can have long arms, but their effective range is going to be dictated by the stance that they're starting in, the guard that they're in. Some people, even though they're tall, they kind of fight short. If you're a fan of other combat sports, you listen to boxing or MMA, you'll hear some analysts talk about how somebody fights long, whether they're a tall person or a short person. And so they're maximizing their reach, or they can kind of be kind of a collective fighter that doesn't do that. So someone can have more reach than you, but you can have better effective range than they do, especially if you're really good at using your footwork and your control of the engagements. So when I think about fighting anybody, and certainly somebody that has a reach advantage over me, I try very hard to kind of patiently manipulate the fight so that I get to my, I call it 1.5 step range. I don't want to step into range with someone that is much bigger than me and stand toe to toe and slug it out. I want to be just a little bit out of range where I can enter in with a shuffle or a passing step, smack them, and then leave. And I have to accommodate for what that opponent is doing as well. So if I start to move and I see that they start to move, I have to kind of in my head mentally adjust for that math so that when that engagement finally happens, it's happening in the place and the time that I want it to. So I sometimes hear shorter fighters talk about rushing in. Not a good way to do it. Rushing in, you don't have a lot of control. So you want to make sure that you're manipulating the range. You're taking your time until you get to a place where you can enter in with a threat, make the transition happen where you want it to, and then leave usually off the center line. So I will kind of move around with the person. If they aggress, I have no problem backing out and not allowing them to take the engagement they want, because if they're happy, I'm probably not. So I will take my time in an engagement until I find the entrance that works for me. I will step in and I will do my thing, and then I will roll out to an angle or not. And I don't necessarily shoot for angles that I see. I shoot for angles that are going to happen. And that's part of that killing in transitions. So when I'm that 1.5 steps out, I will move in with my tools. And as they move to adjust, I hit the opening that I know will be created based on their movements. And then I leave again. So if a person does have a reach advantage and they tend to be aggressive, and I know that there's a chance that they're going to throw, I might step in to bait that shot. I might actually scooch in a little bit. And then as they throw, I will back out, trying to prompt them into reaching. And then when they've reached and overcommit a little bit, then I'll come in, hit them and leave. And that kind of goes into the second part that I talk about a lot, which is the defensive wedge. So, and this is in the document with some diagrams, and we'll put some drill videos in the Facebook comments later. But essentially the defensive wedge is at the longest range, no matter what my opponent throws at me, it all kind of hits me on my center line. So very little motions will block everything. The closer I get to them, the bigger that kind of wedge of real estate I have to account for gets, until I'm in extreme range and wraps can hit me in the back. And then your range is, your wedge is 360. That's really hard to block all that. So I want to, if I'm going to defend, I want to defend where my wedge is narrow. And then I can actually step in past that defense and throw my counter shot where their wedge is now wide. They have to move much more to defend. But again, I don't stay there, because if I get stuck, if I get planted right in front of a big dude who has a power advantage, a weight advantage, or a height advantage where they can reach angles that I can't, or are very hard for me, all of those make my chances in the fight go down. So I want to maximize all the times in a fight that are good for me and minimize the times in a fight that are bad for me. And I think I had one more quick note I just wanted to address, which was, the other thing that I'll do is often I will throw a shot. I'm trying to inhabit the space between me and my opponent. And if it hits them, that's awesome. But what I'm trying to do is close that line either as I come in or they come in. If you're a Bellatrix fan, Duke Paul's moving block is a very similar concept. He talks about it quite a bit. And you just want to make sure that you're closing that line on the way in, because I've also had shorter fighters talk about, well, do I have to let my opponent have a free shot? I'm not a fan of that mentality. There should not be a free shot. If they throw at you from their longer range, that is a thing you should use against them. You should use that. Nobody gets free anything in a fight. But you got to make sure you close that line. And if you just rush in leading with your face or a target, then they do get a free shot. So I'm not a fan of that. So when I approach people, and I'm used to fighting Uther, Havek, people that have a foot of height on me, and sometimes as much as 100 pounds of weight on me. And when I fight those people, it's not profoundly different than how I fight everybody else. The math is different, right? The equations are a little bit different, but I'm still focused on controlling when the fight happens, where the fights happen, negating engagements that are really good for them. If Uther is happy, I'm almost surely sad. So I don't want to be part of that. And then using those angles and kind of those tools to make sure that I get things that I'm trying to maximize my chances. And I don't like to lean to try to reach angles. I like to step and pivot, because that always keeps me balanced and the ability to throw the next thing, or the ability to negate and leave, which I want to have the ability to do all the time if those things go badly for me, which they might when you're fighting really, really good fighters that also happen to be giants. So I'm going to stop rambling there. I might chime in again later, but I want to give other people a chance as well.
Okay. A lot of what Mark said is things that I actually try to apply myself. And I maybe say them a little differently. And so if it sounds like I'm repeating some of the things, I'm just going through kind of some of the ideas that I've had to learn. Okay. So one of the things that I find important in the fight, and especially it's control of the tempo of the fight, right? And so I like to make sure that it's my tempo, my beat, that I'm in charge of. And this is when Mark said that if the fight isn't going the way he likes, he has no problem stepping out of the fight. I do the same thing. And so if I come in, and it's like I'm finding that the fight is not evolving that moment the way that I wanted it to, or to be my fight, then I will literally defend and step out, because then what I can do is zero out the tempo of the fight and then reset the tempo of the fight at this pace I like, right? So that's what I think one of the primary things that I'm going to do, and this works for any fighter of any size, right? Tempo of the fight and controlling that is huge. Control of the engagement. This is exactly what I was talking about. The same idea is that if you're not finding the fight going the way you want, you don't have to stay there, right? A lot of fighters will come in, and like you were saying, some of the smaller guys will say that they feel like they have to rush in, like a bull rush, to get in there, and then once they're there, they kind of feel like they have to stay there now, right? They don't really have a plan, or not a plan. I don't like plans, but like they don't have any idea what they're doing there. They've gotten there, and if things don't work out, they're stuck, right? And so that's not a good spot to be. The fight doesn't have to end there. So what you can do is at any time you can like defend and get out, or do like a lateral movement, right? And go off the fight, more like a strafing run. You come in, you attack, bang, 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 right? Maybe you kill him, maybe you wound him, whatever. But if things aren't going well, you can just roll off, and stay on guard. Always stay on guard. That's the whole point, right? But you can then reset and attack this tempo again. And so I think that's an important thing. The lateral movement, and what Mark was saying too, I think that when he was saying that he doesn't like this kind of bending over type attacks, it is important to stay centered over your body, right? With the balls of your feet, so your movement is always there. And this is something that I try to tell people: don't get yourself nailed to the ground by having your heels kind of attached to the ground, because once you do that, you can't move that foot, right? Your weight settles into it, and you're actually kind of stuck there. So, but having yourself kind of a little bit like horse stance, a little bit on the balls of your feet, so your rapid movement can happen, allows you to get out of the fight, right, and reset the tempo. Another thing is choose your fight. Don't let them set the fight. If you don't like the style that they're doing, you're not stuck doing that. You can bide your time. You can hope to, to make a mistake. One of the things that a lot of fighters do is they get frustrated if things are not going well, and then that's where you make mistakes, because you start stepping outside of your real structured martial art, right? And at that moment, that's when you make mistakes. Your shield's in the wrong place, you're leaning over, whatever, and that's when you get nailed, right? So instead of that, patience and just saying, I'm going to trust in my martial art, and I'm going to stay focused on this, and don't let myself get drawn out at all. And then at that point, you can organically kind of let the fight happen. And so that was that one. And the closing shot that Mark was talking about, I do throw these. And one of the things, because like you said, you shouldn't allow your opponent to have like a free area for you to cross through just because they're a little taller or they have like longer reach than you. You have to threaten them, so that way they don't feel that that's a safe place for them to just sit there like a firing platform and attack you. So you attack them, and then use that shot, come in with it, and you can follow these through. Don't throw shots though that are not going to be good. Like I'm not a believer in the idea that you throw a shot that is just gonna like tangle stuff up or whatever. Try and wound them, right? And maybe you do, maybe you don't, that's okay. But if you come in and you throw, you shouldn't waste shots, is my point, I guess I'm saying, is that you should try and have each one of these shots be a valid attack. And I think that's an important thing. But I mean, those are kind of the strategies I use. When I'm doing, another thing is, I got to be honest with you, a large strategy for me is that I like legging my opponent. Legging my opponent does two things. One, it makes them around my size, right? And two, or even give me the height advantage for once, for God's sakes, how awesome is that? But the other thing is that it nails them down, right? I've immobilized them. It allows me to have all of those things, massive control of the tempo now, massive control of the engagement. I set all of that. You've fought people when they are on their knees and they try and do the rapid run forward on their knees, that your body's not designed that way. And so you get ahead of yourself, and it's really easy to take advantage of your opponent that way. So that's kind of like some of the things, like you will notice that a lot of my fights, bang, and I'm going to hit you with an offside leg. That's my sweet shot, because everyone is prepared for the regular, kind of shield side leg. And I have mastered this, like, kind of just drop line right into your leg. That's my sweet, that pays the bills. But other than that, I think those are kind of general strategies. And I would say that remember to control the tempo of your fight. Don't rush. Don't let them dictate your fight. So there's no time limit, guys. This is not like a boxing match where we have a bell in 2 minutes. You have the time it takes to win this fight, and don't get frustrated. And other than that, I think that those are kind of some of the strategies.
So I'm going to preempt this by saying that I was actually Mark's squire. And one of the things that he said to me at the point that he took me on after critiquing some of my fighting was, you don't get extra points for killing them faster, right? And I was like, oh yeah, you don't get extra points for killing them faster. So essentially what that equated to is that, especially in that period of my fighting, I was a pretty good, intermediate unbelt, and I knew I could power things. And so I would get in there and just try to kill them as fast as possible, throw the kitchen sink at them, hit them with stuff as hard as I possibly could to assert my dominance with my 5'8" self. But the fact is that I didn't actually have a good perception of the fight or focus in the fight. I was just going there and throwing the kitchen sink at people and hoping that I would be the victor at the end of the fight. But re-equating things and realizing that, oh, I don't have to accept every engagement. I need to control this fight on my terms is really what changed things for me. And I think that that's something that's really important for people to note. And Thorfinn said this before, is you can exit any fight that you don't like. You can come back in and control that. And one of the things that I really wanted to stress is that, a lot of people say that it's a lot harder for smaller people or people with smaller physiques. But at the end of the day, all you have to do is the basics well, and then learn how to control the engagement. If you're like me when I was coming up and you don't even see the opponent's threat in front of you, you need to be assessing those threats. I'm going to talk about that more in a second, but I also use a lot of analogies, so I apologize in advance, but that's sort of how I imagine things in my mind, is by giving, different shapes or figures or something to remind me of it when I'm actually fighting. So I'm a very feel-based fighter. So one of the things, a visualization that really helped me was thinking about the threats and the zones that are going to optimize my offense and my range and protect me a little bit more in the fight. So I think about it as if I am actually assessing my opponent with an analogy of a pie. So Duke Edward told me this back in the day, and he goes, okay, imagine you're looking at your opponent from the sky, you draw a circle around them and you cut it into eighths. So just like a pie. I'm very food motivated, so this is great for me. So essentially, the two slices at the very front in front of your opponent are the most dangerous slices. This is where their defense is most optimal, and it's where the danger zone for you is highest. It's where their offense and their shots are going to be most effective against you. So as a smaller person, I can actually feel the threat once I get into that zone a lot more on my shoulders, on my back, because I know that if you think about the math of, having a taller person, you're here, they can see angles that I can't even dream of. I wish I was still growing. It would be amazing. All the backs of people's heads you can see and hit with a sword must be amazing. But I feel that threat a lot more in that zone. So what I try to do is I try to reach into the obliques of the fight. So those are, the two slices to either side of your opponent. If you can manage to get off that central line and more in line with those zones, this is where their offense is weaker. So if you move into the sword side, for example, you're more likely to stifle their shots or have a quicker block and cover that in that range. And if you move into the shield side, obviously they have to rotate a lot further to follow you around. But what happens as well is you get closer to the juicy parts of the pie that are easier for you to hit. So if you, again, think about the math, from dead in front of them, they have the range advantage, solid defense. But if you can move into the obliques of the fight, it's actually closer and easier for you to access the side, the back of the head, their back. And optimally, the best place to be in the fight is behind your opponent. Obviously, you don't start there. But when I think about moving and the way I want to move through the fight, optimally, I practice a lot of just trying to get behind my opponent in a fight, because those are the best parts of the pie. They have no defense or offense, and you can just take control. Obviously, that's easier said than done, but that's the visualization that I think of. So a big part of that is to get off of the center line of the fight. So when I engage my opponent, as their graces have already stated, I'll probably throw something to keep myself covered, and it's a real and legitimate threat, but it's specifically to pin them down in a point. And then once I move through the mid-range, I won't try to get offline when I'm in the long range, because they can see you doing it and they'll just refocus on you. But if you threaten them, it sort of stops them for half a second. And once you move into the mid-range, that's at the point that you want to start moving off that center line to reach those more optimal places for you to fire from and to. So you can, again, access those vulnerable parts on your opponent and maximize your defense. So again, getting off the center line, moving into the obliques of the fight. And one thing that I can't stress as well, because I hear this a lot, again, when I have smaller fighters ask me, do I just rush into range? People feel like you have to, as a shorter person or a smaller physique person, get toe to toe with your opponent, or get in that, people call it A range, close range. If you feel like you have to fire in that range, that's one thing, but you don't have to stay there. And I would stress, don't be afraid of the mid range. I treat my fights a lot like guerrilla warfare. So again, I'll come in with something, get into the range that I'm comfortable in, which is actually usually the mid-range. Because if you get too close to your opponent, if you're toe-to-toe, again, all of those angles on the back of your head, the back of your shoulders, everything is more vulnerable for you. So again, you're sort of giving your taller opponent an advantage, more of an advantage than you felt they already had by getting toe to toe. The other thing is by staying in super close range and throwing the kitchen sink, you actually stifle your own offense. I find in 90% of my fights that I win, the kill happens in the mid-range. So I might come through, stifle their offense, or I give them a threat to think about, and I actually peel out and stay in that mid-range, and I'll usually nail something in that range. If I get too close, that's at the point that I know I've kind of lost control and I actually need to get out. So again, remember, try not to stay in that toe-to-toe range, because it might feel like you need to be there because people told you you were short, but in the end, it actually does more harm than good for you mathematically. And then the final thing that I would stress as well is someone mentioned recently, you know, well, taller people have the initiative on you. They have the reach. That might be true. However, you kind of know that. And part of fighting is like a chess match. So if you know that they're likely to throw the first shot at you, you might throw something at them. However, you already know this. And if you keep a bit more distance when you first engage, acknowledge the threat that they're actually showing you, because generally people's opening guard will show you what their first fastest shot is going to be. I usually line up myself to face my threat. So whatever they're threatening me with, I try to put my first defense and strongest defense in the way of that path, because quite often what you can do is actually use that knowledge. So you might want to actually block and then use that motion to counter with something. So if it's a big high snap, I'll usually set my defense so that I know that flip snap won't hit me, but I can block it and then come into that mid-range to close range and then nail them in the body or the leg. You can use those sorts of plays. It might take a lot of practice, but again, all you have to do is do the basics well and learn to control the fight to your benefit and keep control. And that's really, you know, that's all there is to it. I think the guys want to.
Yep.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah. So I wanted to circle back something I forgot, and then I wanted to echo a lot of what was said. So one of the things I wanted to add that I forgot to say earlier is that for me, the way I want people to think about measure, which is, you know, range and angles, is not just where you are relative to your opponent, but the potential actions that can happen from there. So somebody in a sword forward guard with a sword foot guard, their most likely potential actions are going to be different than somebody in, you know, a sword back guard with their shield foot back. You know, the way they're going to reach out to you, their opening shots, how long their effective range is going to be shorter, depending on certain positions. And so, like when Eva was talking about getting to people's backs, the way I like to do is I invite them to step places that allow me to have their back. So I don't necessarily work on getting to them. I invite them to go places that put them in a bad position. And in terms of the initiative, I've heard that as well. I actually don't agree with that, though. I fight plenty of fighters that are much bigger than me, and I have no problem taking the initiative away from them and keeping it. It's my ball, and they don't get to have it. And so I think that's that control of the fight piece, and Thorfinn was talking about that as well. Just because they're taller doesn't, or they have a longer reach, doesn't mean that they have to be the one that gets a target first or feels comfortable throwing first. And then I was just curious, because both of you mentioned it, if you guys have different opening shots that you like based on your opponent's position, or if you tend to have certain things you throw that you're comfortable with as closing shots.
Okay, so without going into too much of a thing, because I have a whole thing about like mindset and shit. Mm-hmm. It's that I don't have a plan, mm-hmm. and I think that if you have a plan, you're fucking up, because what's going to happen is your opponent isn't going to do the thing in your plan, right? Let's say that we know that Sir Steve always opens with a leg shot. Well, this time Sir Steve doesn't throw a leg shot, and your plan was, when he throws a leg shot, I'm going to step in, I'm going to do this, right, and close. What that does is it stifles you. And so part of what Eva was saying, which I really was trying to figure out how to vocalize, is a trust in your fundamental skills. And so what happens is, instead of having a plan, you have to have worked on your fundamental skills to the point where you can trust them, right? Then when the moment happens, the fight can unfold organically. So you don't have a plan anymore because you don't need a plan. You present your fight. You come in and you just, okay, this is my stance, whatever your stance is, my standard defense. And then what this allows you to do is to be, hopefully just be present in the fight, right? And clear mind. Clear mind means no, you're not thinking about anything, right? And then, because you've studied and you have practiced, you see his stance, you see their shield position, those type of things, and what they present to you will let the fight have its own voice. The fight is, I like to say, fighting is jazz, right? Because it's the same song, but everyone's doing it differently, right? And every time you have it, it's a different song. It's jazz, and so I think that's a trust in your fundamental skills, which is what we all need to work on, allows you to have the open mind fight. And so that's kind of where I was going with the no plan. So I don't have a plan, but I do have shots that I think that are better for me. But I don't go into a plan where I'm going to throw an offside head or a leg or whatever. When I come up to the guy and I'm going to do a closing shot, it's whatever I think is there, right? Versus I'm going to throw this shot because I like it, and that's, to me, it's a very hard place to get to, and it sounds like a bunch of crazy hippie crap, but it's the real thing, is that if you can, like Muhammad Ali or these quarterbacks in the Super Bowl, they talk about, like, they have no recollection of the event because they were so much in the moment, they were present, that it allows them to just succeed is what I'm trying to say. And a lot of that happens, but the trick is learning to trust in yourself, learning to have faith in your abilities, and then that allows you to take that huge, like, step of faith into, I don't have a plan, and then you go and you just fight. So that's kind of what I was going to say. I was really admiring what Eva was saying, and I think that I was trying to figure out, like, oh, there's something about what I do that is similar to that, and so that's what it was. Thank you for letting me jump back in.
So I'm probably a little bit similar to Thorfinn, and I don't engage any fight with a plan, but I think my favorite openers, usually it depends. If I think I need to get my opponent to engage, because I'm more of a reactionary fighter at the moment. I'm actually trying to work on having a little bit more killing intent from the very start. But if they're not giving me anything to work with, then generally I'll have a look at their setup, and depending on what that looks like, thrusts are always good. I condone the use of thrusting tips for sure, especially for covering and clearing range. And part of that is actually throwing the thrust out. I know that because I don't shove it in with my upper body, I always use my legs to push thrust forward, and then I'm in a good position that my next shot I can do a pretty much full circular return that's going to hit really nicely and crisply to pretty much any section of the body from that point. So I'll see how they respond to that, and then I'll move to one oblique or the other to try and follow up with something that's going to either kill them or make them move. So I know the more I can make their defense respond will create new openings for me. So thrust, or I might throw an offside, or if they're really covered, I'll throw an offside straight at the eyes. It'll either get them or it's going to pin them down so that I have a moment to clear into the range that I want to actually kill them in. And that's pretty much it. Like, I like flip snaps, but that's more of a reaction whilst I'm in the fight, more than like an opening shot.
Can I say something real quick? So you were talking about that kind of the thrust, using the thrust as an attack, and I think I love the thrust. It was actually, I was an early adopter of the low profile thrusting tip, and being a spear fighter, it changed. It was very an easy adaptation for me. I was like really quickly getting a lot of kills with it, and people were like, well, Thorfinn's figured this out. It's like magic or something. It wasn't magic. It was just that using other skill sets and recognizing it's now just a 36-inch spear. But really, I think that the thrusting tip is really best used as a secondary or tertiary attack, right? So you'll do an offside head, right? Or this is just an example, and then they block. As the blow comes back, you can then just roll straight back into a thrust, right? And so you've already power loaded into your shoulder, and it just comes right in. And this is also, you can change the angle of the attack of the thrust to be, it can be a down thrust or whatever. And so I think that while not an opening attack, a secondary or tertiary attack, the thrusting tip is great, and it allows you, like you said, to preload right into the next shot. So you boom, and you're into your next power attack. And so I did think that was really a really good kind of a crossing the zone type of a thing, and once you're there, especially. Okay, cool. Thanks. I'm having fun, by the way. I enjoyed it. Welcome.
All right, so we are talking about strategy and approach. That was very insightful. However, if you have a great strategy, it may not do you any good unless you are able to land a telling blow. So let's talk a little bit about power generation. Sir Eva, I'm going to pop on over to you.
Awesome. So I specifically asked to go first on this one. And the reason for such is because I actually have had the privilege to learn from both Duke Marc and Jarl Thorfinn. And I feel like my style is kind of a nice mesh or amalgamation of the two. But one of the things I mentioned before was like, that was the biggest goal for me coming up in the first couple of years of fighting, is I was really concerned with my ability to throw a good blow and to throw consistently. And I struggled with that at first. And then my fiance and I have had the privilege to travel all over and learn from all sorts of amazing fighters. We travel to the West every couple of years. We come from Lokak, has a basis in Western power style. So, we went and we learned from Duke Radnor and Duke Fabian and Duke Havek and these guys, and certainly our local dukes, and we just have traveled as much as possible. So I have like a plethora of other people's knowledge. So I certainly don't want to try and reteach anyone from the ground up. That's not the purpose of this. But there's a lot of different ways to fight, and certainly these are the things that I've found that have accentuated my power. And really, again, this is doing the basics and the fundamentals well is really what's going to give you consistent power. So, if it doesn't work for you, that's fine. We can do something else. But these are a few principles that I found that really work for me. And the first thing to mention is that really your body needs to be utilized to generate power, especially to generate effortless power, because it doesn't matter how small you are. Sorry, Thorfinn's just changed his t-shirt. He accidentally picked the same shirt. Okay, serious. So I come from more of a rotational power style, again, very Western power centric. But the main point to take away from that is that power generation is like music, right? It really needs to be the body working in unison. And so it comes from the ground up, basically like your foot position, making sure that your feet are in, a solid enough stance that you can actually rotate comfortably from there, staying a little bit low, because the further up you come, the more you sort of rob yourself of power. And making sure that your hip and core and shoulder actually move fairly well together, again, in unison. That's going to really utilize your larger muscle groups rather than the smaller muscle groups. I have no upper body strength. So for me, I can't cheat anything. I can't just arm things in. But realistically, again, everyone should be doing the fundamentals well. It will preserve your body. It makes things a lot easier. But as a smaller person, I don't have the option of just whacking them with my arm. And then from there, having that good rotational style, there's also ensuring that you are refining that technique. So you don't want to be swinging wide. You will find that that will drain your power as well. You want to refine the line. So one of the basic principles we used to talk about is having either your hand or your elbow close to your body in transitions as you deliver. And that sort of refines things. Because essentially what you're doing is you're creating centrifugal force around your spine. And that's how rotational power kind of works. You're moving that mass around your center. The further out it is, the slower it will be. The further in towards your spine it is, the faster and harder it will deliver. One of the other principles that I learned to employ was frame weight transfer. So it's not necessarily just about using the rotational power generation principle. Part of what can either accentuate or rob your power is actually the way you're moving. So certainly I found that if I step in as I'm throwing particular blows, it will have just a little bit more power. It's more directed at the target. But similarly, if I'm actually moving away from my target, I found that I'll end up hitting them with nothing because all of your force is moving in the opposite direction. So it's something to be aware of, is that that can have a huge effect on whether or not the blow that was generated fine actually delivers enough force to the target. One of the things, particularly for me, that was really helpful to learn was actually how to utilize momentum. Returns are a huge part of generating power because the return is almost as important as how you deliver the blow in the first place. Remembering that momentum is sending mass in motion creates force. One of the general principles I think about is actually creating circles with the tip of my sword for generating power in connected blows. Because you can certainly return back to your start, but if I have more of like a flowy circular style. So one of the things that my partner actually suggested I practice is go out in the backyard and just move your sword around and scribe circles with the tip of your weapon and see how it wants to move. See how when you move your core and your body, it carries, and sort of learn almost the very natural or ergonomic way that the sword wants to travel when you move in particular ways. And at first I went, no, that's really embarrassing. I'm not doing that. And it wasn't for another couple of years that I actually did it. And I learned that particularly your hand doesn't have to return behind you to be able to develop power in a combination of blows. It's just the tip of the sword has to come above your head or behind you, depending on where you are. And what that does is those circles start to develop more and more momentum, which when you actually contact will transfer into your target. So that might not be for you depending on your style. It works well for me. And certainly that's another point that you can refine that. It doesn't have to always be big circles. Eventually, once you feel how the sword wants to move, you can tighten that circle and you can shorten the time. So again, this was what I was touching on before, that power generation is like a piece of music. You can be doing all the right things, but if one little part is out of sequence, you could be having trouble actually delivering force because there's just one thing that's not quite aligning in the right time to make everything work perfectly and sound beautiful if it's music. So one of the things that I can't stress enough is actually troubleshooting. If you're finding that you're having trouble delivering power, you're getting all of the advice, you think you're doing all the right things, I can almost guarantee, because I know I wasn't a very physically aware human being, that I would learn something and go, I'm definitely doing it. And then someone would give me feedback. I go, but I was doing that. I can't stress enough. We all have smartphones. Film yourself or get your training buddy and go, can you just watch my fights and tell them what you're specifically working on? If it's making sure that the hip and shoulder are moving in unison so that you're delivering that core force, let them know beforehand so they know what to look for. But troubleshoot your fighting. Figure out whether or not your feet are, too far back. If your stance is a little bit too split, you'll find that maybe you're not able to actually transfer force with the hip and shoulder because you're getting bound up. It might be your guard selection as well. That was one thing that I wanted to touch on briefly, was we all have different styles and different kingdoms will demand different sword and weapon and shield positions. But a lot of the times, teachers will try to sort of put band-aid fixes on shorter or smaller physique students because they want them to be successful. So they'll go, okay, well, I find that's an easy target. So move your sword really far forward. Okay, well, maybe put your shield here. But the thing is if you're in a guard that you don't feel powerful in, the chances are you will have a hard time delivering power from that position. So remember that, again, this will be a lot about doing the basics well. But part of that means that as you're practicing, you'll probably get killed a lot. But that's where you start to learn your timing and to learn to control those fights. And that's the most important principle. Trying to just pre-block and ending up scrunched up and feeling weak in your guard isn't a good solution. That's me.
Hey guys. Okay. Gotta put my glasses on. All right. Eva, you did a great job and really expressed a lot of really good information there. I think that I'll tell a story about being like my size versus my knight, who was a big, strong guy, right? And to try to lead into this power generation thing I'm going to talk about. I was squire to a guy named Obadiah the Obstreperous, who was built like a refrigerator, but if you just put a head on top of it, right? And so it's just massively strong man. And he could like take a nail and with one hammer blow, bang, all the way to the bottom, right? I've seen him do it because he helped me build my mom's fence, bang, and this kind of stuff. So I was kind of a slight guy, and I plumped up over the years, but when I was his squire, and I wanted to fight just like him, right? He had the ability to just throw blows from like kind of just nowhere, boom, crushingly hard, right? And so I couldn't figure out how he could do that. I was like, I could have it start in the same spot and end in the same spot, but I couldn't have the power. And so what I did was I kind of created this middle section from start to finish to make it so I could look like I was throwing the same blows this guy did, right? And that created an entire different set of power generation that I needed to learn. And so it wasn't, it was more of a wanting to emulate him, but just not having the massive power that he had. And so I had to figure out how to do it. And I'm a fighter who learns visually. So I can just watch a fighter do something and then just do it. And so that, granted, that's a natural advantage, right? But so I couldn't figure out how to express this until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago now. I worked with another knight that trained with the same guy, and he would say, like, I would say, like, well, I just do this and this. And then he'd go, no, Thorfinn, that's not what happens. You do this part, this part, this part, and this part before you hit the guy. And I was like, I do all that stuff, right? And so I had to learn to communicate and figure out like how to do that. And so that was Sir Artos, was a guy who was really good at analyzing things. And so he could analyze what I do, and it helped because now I can communicate it. So I think one of the main things here, guys, is remember power starts toes up, right? From the ground up. You are part of the earth. So using the power from your feet all the way to your hips, your knees, how you move creates all kinds of like power through using the core muscles. And these are the things we were talking about kind of essentially. Eva was mentioning these things. And I think that absolutely a lot of what I do for power generation is about that. But then what happened over time was I started to realize I was doing what now I call small circle power generation. I had done a type of jujitsu for a long time called small circle jujitsu, and it's about creating these kind of power fulcrums, if you will, in martial arts. And I did that for a long time, and it didn't. I didn't realize it had kind of bled into my sword fighting. So what I mean by that is you don't have to have a giant arc to create the power. A lot of fighting stances, a lot of fighting styles believe that you start behind you, and then the hips come and engage, and it engages your core, and then the arm comes out in kind of a giant circle, right? And then that creates the power for you. It doesn't have to be that. You can actually create the same type of power, but by creating different fulcrums in your body. The more fulcrums you have, the more power you create, right? And so what I'm talking about is like, first off, I'll tell you, in a circle of your sword is a circle, right? That's what you can hit. Your hand is the center of the circle. So you don't have to have the hand be way in front of you to create the power. You can actually have the circle be, come from here, the center where you're at. But what ends up happening is you do this by taking, so like I said, it transfers from the ground into your hips, into your core, in your upper body, and then your arm can literally do like this type of a motion right here. See that change of angle? That alone creates a ton of power. So now you're transferring all that up in your body. As the hand comes out, now you can just let the hand guide the blowing, right? It's not about, like, I've seen so many strong guys who are wickedly strong. They do these real stiff arm blows, right? Because they think that I'm strong, so that's speed and that's power. It's not. They're really stiff and slow and kind of easy to predict. But I think the way that if they were to adapt to having, like I said, more of these kind of fulcrums inside of your swing, it allows you to create the power that you need to have there. And so it's kind of piggybacking on what Eva was saying is that I had worked with her a little bit, and she worked with Mark as well a lot, and Mark and I have similar kind of power generation ideas. And so we've talked about it a bit, and some of the things, honestly, we just figured out through, us bashing each other in the head. And so I think that there was an adaptive period where I was figuring out why and how this worked. And so, guys, it's about, and I would love to talk to, it's really, I think this would really translate better if I could be physically with you and show you. But so this type of small power, like just this motion here, creates so much power that if you let the hand come out, you could crack a guy in almost any kingdom and they're going to take it, right? And it's because of the, I don't know, like I was saying, the concept of letting the energy come from the ground up through you into your shoulder. You can even hold it too. There's the coolest part about this, the type of power generation, is you can transfer the energy in here. It's still, all your muscles are now loaded for you to fire, and then you can then just bang, right? And so anyway, I think that I'm just kind of like reiterating some of the stuff that Ava said. So if you guys ever want to talk more, see me at an event, come talk to me, and I'll show you what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so I have to share a power generation story as well then. So I came into the SEA using a two-handed sword from a different sword art, and I never got any formal training at all with a one-handed sword in the SEA. It didn't happen. But when I was trying to branch out, one of the people that I stole from was actually Thorfinn. I remember I had my longsword. He and I were sparring at a practice, and he was in this very sword forward guard, and I looked at his position and I discounted it. Like,
sure.
That's not a threat. And then he popped me in the forehead, and I was really offended. But it was, and so I was like, well, I want to be able to do that. And so I started experimenting with more sword forward, one-handed sword guards. And I actually remember that my obliques and my intercostals got so sore on that side.
Oh yeah, that's because of yeah, absolutely.
Because what I would do is I would let my hip roll forward, so I was storing that power. I had that tautness across the body, and then I would throw. And so I definitely, I think that I do it a little differently and I articulate it a little differently. But I 100% stole that from Thorfinn, so I have to give him those props. I don't think of rotational power generation in what I do. I actually think of my power generation as very linear, and what I mean by that is that 100% I want to drive from the ball of the foot, right, the big toe. But I don't want any of that coming from the arm. I want to kill people with my body, and my nice relaxed arm just delivers the power. And that's something I got from boxing, because when we would talk about throwing a jab or a cross, if you muscled those punches, they were big and they're easy to see. But if you powered it with the body, you just were loose in the arm, it would pop out with no tell, and it was really important. So for me, what I think of is I think about my hand moving in a straight line and letting the sword tip revolve around it. So, okay. Right. So I can collapse the elbow if I want and to get this kind of a line. But for me, the hand's always moving in a straight line, and then the stick revolves around it. And so that's a very kind of like whip cracky or saber cutty kind of a power generation. And that's important because power in SEA combat, you need the drive, but you also need the speed. If you put your sword against somebody and you shove them, they're not going to take it. But if you pop somebody really sharp and fast with no penetration, they're not going to take it. So you need a combination of the push, the drive, and the snap. And so I like to to drive my hand straight in a way that lets the point rotate around. And so I get the drive from the hand moving straight and then the snap from the tip. And so even if I'm throwing offsides, like I'll throw an onside and then I will cover, because I think it's always important to move through defensive positions between sword shots. And so from here, if I throw the offside, it's not around, my hand still goes straight, but it lets the tip come around. And so I'm always driving with the hand, the tip comes out. This is important, especially for smaller fighters who, like we were talking about the rushing in thing. If you rush in, and I actually grab like a little stick right here. But if you rush in and you're tight and you have a very, I call it the difference between whip or wand power generation. If you're always punching stuff with these arcs and you're in close, you're going to hit in the wrong part of the sword and you're going to have all push and no pop, and they're not going to register. So yeah, even when you're in tight, if you want to throw the offside, and I think Thorfinn does this too, I actually think about refusing the elbow behind my head so that the tip, see, the tip's moving around my hand. So everything is about how straight can I drive the hand, driven by the body, to allow the tip to roll around. And if I'm throwing other things, I'm still moving the hand straight, but you see how much circular motion is happening with the stick. So my tips for power generation, without being right there with you and going over everything, is I want to kill people with my body, and I just want to deliver the power with the hand. That's really important to me. So that also helps me not get tired when I'm fighting for a long time. And then making sure that my motion is allowing me to have enough tip velocity and to hit with the right part of the sword, so that all of that crack and that drive is being delivered to my opponent. And often I find fighters that don't have a lot of natural strength, like the big burly dudes, they can get away for a while until they get tired kind of arming stuff, right? But those of us who are average or smaller, we've never been able to arm stuff. We've had to learn how to do the body. But a lot of people who are smaller, or they start to get tired, and I've heard people say that their first shot is okay, but then their second or their third one has no power. That's because their body's getting away from them. Maybe they drove with the first one, but now they're leaning forward. They're just trying to arm the second and the third. So you always want to make sure that when you throw a shot, your body recovers it so that your body can support the next shot, and your body can support the next shot. And if you're one of those people that finds my first shot seems to be landing okay, and then my second or my third or my fourth shot is is bad, then clearly the connection with your body's falling apart somewhere, and you got to go back and fix those things. And a good way to do that is to make sure that you're moving through a defensive position between shots. It will keep you alive, and it will force you to keep your body engaged with kind of your blow throwing process. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah.
Yep, Jarl Thorfinn, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I kind of did. So Mark was talking about, let me put my glasses on. I gotta read now, guys. First off, one of the things that you showed in your movement was you did like an onside to an offside head, right? Mm-hmm. And what I want to express is, from watching you and how I talk about it, is that your hand only maybe moves like 4 or 5 inches total, mm-hmm. right? And the power is still being created by this motion here, right? Mm-hmm. The hand is guiding it in. And so I watched you do it even, and I was like, oh damn, I forgot to mention this, is that when you're doing these type of blows, like the hand is just really a guide, right? This is how you get it there. This creates the speed, right? And direction of the blow. This kind of like this type of motion that you did, that's where the power came from, and all that transfers through all of that, right? But so you don't have to have these dramatic giant swings, guys. You can do like a massively powerful combination from onside to offside with maybe a 5 or 6 inch motion of your hand. And I saw you do it just there. One of the other fulcrums I forgot to talk about was the grip on your sword. I do kind of a loose grip where I have it kind of here, right? And my hand tightens right before the impact. So that creates even another level of power generation. So it goes toe to core to shoulder to elbow to out to your hand. And so we're talking like each one of these things is a force multiplier. And so that, you know, like when I said like, well, I can just do like an offside head, bang, right there, and like guys are stunned that I can hit them that damn hard. It's because it's like, I mean, from my, you know, left big toe, it's come up through my whole body, right? It seems pretty subtle, but it's learning to harness these things. And if you have to do exaggerated movements when you're learning them, fine, do that. Like do that at the Pell, right? Go to the Pell and spend time trying to figure out how to make this type of power generation. And, you know, wherever you're at, give me a call. I'll come out and show you. You just have to buy me a beer. But the last thing was, that was it. I went over it. Okay, I just checked my notes. But yeah, I just wanted to say, Mark, that was awesome, the way you did that.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah.
So I wanted to add as well, because Mark made me think of something, and actually the first thing Thorfinn touched on, which is the grip in the hand, because one of the things that I think about is actually accelerating the tip. You hear this a lot, where it's as Thorfinn said, you know, loose grip in the hand, and then upon impact, you either loose grip or pull with the back fingers. And what this actually does is it accelerates the tip. So as he was saying, it's from the ground up. So if you think about, you know, you accelerate through the body, then the elbow, then it's that last little bit. So if you hammer grip the sword and hold it too tightly, you'll actually find that even your angles, like you'll reduce your range, because your shot will only come so far. Whereas with a loose grip, it actually will cleave through the target a lot easier. So that might be part of it as well. But certainly that tip acceleration, I think about quite a lot, because, you know, we're small people, so we're like finessey elves, but like the keeper type, for sure. And then the second thing was when I was thinking about frame weight transfer, it doesn't necessarily have to be with a step, although certainly what the theory of the frame weight transfer does is it means that instead of just trying to create the power rotationally in a more direct fashion, this is essentially using my 75 to 80 kilos worth of human pushing forward through the target with the weapon. But you can also push off of the back leg to create that frame weight transfer. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a step. It can also be that driving off the back leg to really push that force forward. That's what I got.
Great.
Can I add one more thing? Yeah. Sorry, I'm having a good time as well. So particularly for the smaller fighters, we can't get away with skipping very many of these steps or getting very many of them wrong because we don't have the mass. And so all of us have talked about using the body to generate the power, and we all articulate it slightly differently. But in terms of troubleshooting, one of the things, so I talked about letting your body disconnect. For me, it's really important that my hips stay kind of stacked under my shoulders. I try not to lean too far back or too far forward. Particularly if I see a lot of people, especially if they're shorter people, when they're trying to defend, they arch their upper back. That kills your kinetic chain. The ability to have that, right? So if you find yourself arching your upper back, or on video, you find yourself looking up by arching your upper back, that is 100% something you need to address. Even my squire, who's 6'4", 260, when he was retreating from people, because he was tall, he was trying to get his head out of the way, he was arching his back, and he was having trouble powering shots when his weight was backwards because he was breaking there. So make sure that we call it not breaking the pipe, the T, right? Make sure that is connected when you're practicing.
Can I jump in? So part of that is once your head starts to get back like that, what I talked about earlier was not having your heels nailed to the ground, right? And this was earlier when I was talking about movement and control and tempo. If you start to be backwards and you're fighting, like your body is physically behind you, then your heels are grounded, and you cannot make the type of steps that it takes to have like footwork and control of lateral movement. And so that's super important. I've seen too many fighters that do that kind of thing because they think, like you said, I think it's a protecting your head. I really do think that's what it's a natural behavior to protect your head, right? Like we can all live without an arm. You can't live without a head, right? And so our natural behavior is to do this, get it out of harm's way. But you can't fight a successful fight either back. And I went through a phase where I was too far forward, where I was doing this kind of really hyper forward type of fighting style. And what I found was the same exact thing. I was nailed to the ground going that way. So if I had to transition, I had to do a massive, a change in my stance, which then again, when you do big changes, that's when you have to make things open. That's when people hit you. So what you were saying was, I agree entirely about having, maybe I didn't say this in the power generation part, was to be kind of a horse stance where you're centered over your core, right, to the ground, right? And so your head's not too far back, it's not too far forward, you're fluid. It's important to be fluid, right? If you can't move, you can't fight, right? And so, I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what you were saying there. I do appreciate all of it. It's great information. But yeah, I think that's huge. I've seen guys out there. Remember, if you can keep your feet underneath you, you have the ability to at any moment change the direction, the tempo, and power of the fight all at the same time. As soon as you start having these things that are like real defined like stances, then you've stolen your power, options, and everything else. So just be like, I mean, I do this drill with people. I'm like, move around on the balls of your feet, right? Like move forward, move back, move forward, right? And I used in jiu-jitsu, we did one where, and I think I did this with Ava, where we reached out and we said, okay, this is how far apart we are. Each person now it's going to stay at that distance no matter what, right? So it's a distance type of training thing, but allows you to keep moving. So if she steps forward, that means I have to step back 1 inch, right? To keep that exact 36 inches between each other, right? And so it's kind of a play back and forth thing with power as well, and kind of control, because let's say I now come at her, she has to address that, so she steps back, right? And we keep this range. It's a range drill, but at the same time, it is a motion drill. It's how do you transfer your body throughout the fight to always be ready to fight. And so that was a fun drill, I thought. But that's where I was going.
No, we use that one too. That's an awesome drill. Not enough people do it.
Yeah. Well, me and Eva had the same shirt on earlier because, great minds think alike.
Yep.
Well, speaking of power generation, I have heard it said before that despite you being your own worst enemy, more often than not, your armor and your weapon can possibly work against you as well. Hopefully we could talk a little bit about that. I'm going to switch back over and take it to you, Jarl Thorfinn.
Okay. So when you first start in the SCA, traditionally you're borrowing gear. And borrowed gear, first off, should be awful. It should be an inspiration to get your own gear, right? Don't make it so comfortable that they're like, well, I'll just keep these arms and legs. It should be kind of sucky. But when you do make your gear, I believe, so I have a kind of a authenticity thing. I think that you should try and find your time period and try and emulate it. It's okay to use modern elements because we all have to go to work on Monday. So if you need to have, what's that shit called? The kinetic,
that Zoom stuff.
Zoom bang stuff underneath your chain mail. So that way, you don't have like massive contusions. That's okay too. I think that it is, armor, and I have a whole thing with, if we were to go, I don't know how far you want to go with this. I could go into an entire concept of what to bring to the battlefield and what to bring to the tournament field. The tournament field, you should have something that is light protective. And I fight with a 36-inch sword with a thrusting tip. So I'm a fairly successful sword and shield fighter, I would say. And in battlefield, though, I'm substantially better with other weapons. I think my actual skills are in 9-foot spear, and I fight with like a 5-foot axe and a knife, which is like a billy club. Mm-hmm. Okay. so for tournament fighting, I think that you should focus on having mobility in your armor, because the thing is that your armor, first off, armor is weird to wear. Okay, so we need to, especially for new fighters, you guys need to remember, armor is not normal. You're going to have to learn to do everything a little bit differently in your armor, right? Every motion, because you're now carrying weight, every motion is either staggered or exaggerated even, right? So you should find armor that's comfortable, buy quality. If you're not a maker, buy quality armor. And in practice, I would say wear a little more armor than you wear in tournaments, because in a tournament, odds are you're only going to get hit a couple times, right? In practice, hopefully you fight 30 or 40 fights a night, right? So if you're fighting, many fights, you need to make sure that your body can come back, Wednesday night and do it again. So put the time in. Don't be afraid to invest in good equipment. Good equipment is going to save you, right? I think it's huge. In tournament fighting, I don't know, depending on what kingdom you're in or what rules you have, I fight with currently a center grip kite shield, and I have fought many different styles over the years. I was originally a side strapped heater guy. And then in the 1990s, it was a big deal to try and see how stupidly small you could make your heater. And so it was a race to have the smallest heater that you could succeed with. And so Helgi won the contest, Sir Helgi. His shield was so small that his elbow stuck out like that far, right? And so it was a bit of a bragging thing, to be honest with you. In the West, it became how small can I have a shield and still be successful? And so it was about pushing ourselves. And so a lot of us kind of did. I think, I don't know. It's just that your armor should be flexible. You should be able to do any motion that you'd be able to do it without armor on. You should work towards having that. I've seen too many guys buy like a shield basket or a demi gauntlet that doesn't allow them to any kind of motion. Like I have blows that if my hand's not like this, I can't throw that blow, right? Or like this. So if I have something that makes it so I can only do this, I'm losing out on many angles and shots and kind of techniques. And so don't let your armor hinder you. Your armor needs to be something that is comfortable. You should have armor that you feel is like clothes, right? You put it on, it's comfortable. You can be 8 hours in this, right? And that's the trick, guys, is that when you're at Penzik or Estrella or whatever, or Lily's War, and you're going to be in your armor 8 hours, you should have it be something that you can wear. Also, don't think like, I don't know how to describe this. It should be organic to you. You should be able to have armor that is protective but flexible. It's useful. And if you're out there and you're thinking, oh well, I bought this shield basket and this guy is trying to help me here with my defense, and he says it's because I can't do this with my wrist. Well, he's wrong because I have the shield basket. Instead, listen to that guy, right? Instead of being a yabba about everything, instead go when someone's like, well, here's why you're having this problem. A lot of times, these gear that you buy is not designed around, it's protection versus, usefulness. And so be thoughtful with your gear, try and update it, buy a cool helmet. And for God's sakes, the helmet is your face. And so as you learn to have renown and reputation and all these things, people will see your helmet and that's who you are, right? This is so well documented that it's in the Iliad, guys, right? I mean, Patroclus borrows Achilles' armor. They think it's Achilles, right? And so this is literally your armor becomes how people see you. Be thoughtful, and I know that's hard. I know I get it. It's expensive, but buy a nice helmet and then move forward from there. You know, get yourself an Aesir armor helmet when you're ready for, you know, that next big step. But no, that was a uncalled out plug, by the way.
Shameless.
But anyway, armor, I don't actually have that much to bring to the table on this, because I think that first off, armor should be useful, armor should be protective, and armor should be you should be mobile in it. That's it. So same thing with weapons. If you want to talk about like war and everything else, I have a whole diatribe I'll go on. So next person.
All right, so I'm going to echo a lot of that. So in terms of armor, your armor has to be safe, and has to be safe from your opponents. And you have to be safe from your armor. Too often I see people buy van braces that are too long, and then they're constantly grinding their wrists, or they have demi-greaves that are grinding into their knees. Or, you know, if your armor is hurting you, it is wrong. I don't care how much you spent on it, who gave it to you, how much time you worked on it in the shop. I've certainly spent hours on gauntlets that sucked. But if your armor is hurting you, it's wrong, and you either have to replace it or modify it. You should be able to move in your armor. Like Thorfinn said, I can do everything in my kit that I can do out of it. And sometimes for shits and giggles, I will do cartwheels and somersaults. I've done pull-ups and climbed up the climbing rope in the gym in my armor just to show that I could. You should be able to have armor that is that comfortable and mobile. You know, if you read some of the period stuff, they were expected to be able to do calisthenics in their armor. So we should be able to, right? We should be able to do that kind of stuff. It should be comfortable. You know, check for things like exposed foam. It's really easy to spray some foam in there, but if that's on your skin and you start to chafe or get a rash or it's stained, you got to get rid of it, or at least cover it. So your armor, it has to be safe. It cannot hurt you, or it is wrong. It has to be mobile enough you can do all the things you want to do, and if it's not, you have to modify it. And it should be comfortable. If any of those things are lacking, then, you know, you're fighting not just your opponent but your own armor, and that's bad physically, but that can also create kind of a psychological feedback loop. It can be hard enough to put on armor anyway. You know, you just drove an hour to practice. Dukes or Smashy is there. You got to put on your gear and deal with that. And now you're worried about your own gear hurting you or not being comfortable. So that's not good. And it is more fun having worn crap and some pretty nice stuff now. It is more fun to put on pretty armor. You will enjoy yourself more if your armor is in good repair, if you're proud of how it looks, if it's from a cohesive time period, whatever time period that is. So once you've gotten through the safe, mobile, comfortable filters, look at having armor that you're proud of, and that's really, really important. With the sword, you should use the lightest sword that you can consistently kill people with. That does not mean an ultralight sword, right? I favor an ultralight sword, but what I mean by that is that often with us average to small people, they give them like a really heavy sword, like, oh, you're gonna have trouble with power. Here's this heavy brick, so that, you know, it'll kill people for you. If you cannot manipulate that weapon, if you can't put it in the places it needs to go quickly and smoothly, it's never going to hit anybody anyway. And if you can't accelerate the thing, it doesn't matter how heavy it is, it's not going to hit very hard. So you want to have the most maneuverable swords you can. Maneuverability beats the Mack truck effect. And that's whether you're talking about single sword or great weapons, you have to be able to get it there. So, and if you have good body mechanics and you're not arming stuff, you should be able to use a fairly light sword. I use a minimum 1.25 inch stick. In terms of the handle, I'm not a fan of specialty handles. Period swords had, you know, kind of rectangular or almond-shaped sword handles. So my sword has an almond-shaped sword handle. I don't like finger grooves or triggers or things like that. That's a little bit more individual, and I know that there are definitely some schools of thought that really like shaped handles. I'm just not one of those people. But again, it should be comfortable. And then when you're looking at your armor or your sword, oh, sorry, before I even go there, use a normal length sword. When people go, oh, you're small, here's a 28-inch sword. You're just making all those problems you think you have because you're a shorty so much worse.
Yeah, exacerbating.
Right? Especially if you give somebody a short 2-inch thick rattan sword, it's awful, right? They can't move it, and now they can't reach people. But also, I sometimes see where people are given an extra long sword. The longer a weapon is, the more unwieldy it becomes. Not that you can't learn to use that well, but again, And then if you are in close on somebody, that longer sword can become a liability rather than an advantage. So I'm a big fan of the 36, 37-inch sword, using it pretty well. And then you want to check on how all of your gear interacts. If you have a beautiful sword basket, but the demi-gauntlet you have, you cram it in there and now you can't move it, or you're stuck in like a bear paw fist, you can't do all the things you'd be able to do. Unfortunately, and this is, I see this more with small female fighters that come into practice, but I see it with small males as well. Somebody crammed them in like a street hockey glove and then shoved that into a bar basket, and now they're stuck in that hammer grip Eva was telling about. They can't bend their wrists, and they can't flex, they can't use their fingers well, and so the way their gear interacts has destroyed their ability to do the techniques they know how to do. I see that with great weapon fighters a lot too. If they have gauntlets that force them to close down into a hammer grip, or the cuff is too narrow and it kind of locks down over their van brace. So when you're looking at gear, whether you're making it or you're buying it, make sure that it interacts with your other pieces of gear well, or that beautiful, $800 set of gauntlets, which might be gorgeous in some other context, are useless for you. They're worthless because you can't. Yeah. So those are kind of my kind of bullet points. I was really lucky. I learned how to make stuff on my own for the most part, with the exception of my helmet, which Eva's partner made for me, and he was so very excited to do that. I made all my gear because I like to joke that I am a whiny bitch about my gear. If it's an ounce off, I'm not happy about it, because I can feel the difference. If I make a sword out of rattan, I'm like, this sword is dead. I hate this sword. On paper, it looks great. It's 1.25 inches. It's 36 inches long. It has a thrusting tip, but I hate the sword and I would like it to die in a fire. So you want to make sure that it feels right, that it moves well. And I am a big fan on thrusting tips, both because you could stab with swords and periods, so you might as well stab people. And
for real, right?
Right.
I mean, God.
And because the threat of the thrust or the motion of the thrust opens up so many things. So whether you kill people with it or you cause a transition that creates an opening, they're incredibly useful. So I would say those are kind of like my bullet points on gear, and I'll let Eva jump in because she's gone through, I think, even more suits of armor than I have, actually.
So I'm super fortunate because my man actually is a master armorer, so pretty cool. He replaces my gear more than I want to, and in fact, we have arguments over my half gauntlet because it's a little soft, but I love it. Anyway, it's funny that Thorfinn mentioned the armor being your face, because I actually have a 12th century Rust kit that I based off of his harness, and every time I'm in it, I fight just a little bit more mean. Like it's like the Rorschach thing. Like I'm not trapped in here with you. You're locked in here with me, and it completely changes my fighting. So I actually favor same sort of sword as Mark, so I won't cover that again, but I will again emphasize that like armor and weapons really are a temporary thing. So don't be afraid to try new things. If something feels wrong, if it's hurting you, if you're immobile, that's going to be a detriment to your fighting. One of the things with my harness is that pretty much everything aside from my helm are made from lighter weight materials. So my breastplate is aircraft grade aluminium. I use plastic cuisses, but a lot of that is because in my kingdom, we have to fly everywhere. So I need my harness to be with sword and shield under 23 kilograms. I don't know what that is in pounds. But having said that, like, even though we actually develop as fighters like muscle in really weird ways because our sport is kind of weird, we're expected to be mobile and do a martial art that means we need to also load our bodies with gear. So if you are someone that doesn't have a lot of muscle mass, or you're finding that you're getting overly tired out, you can actually move to lighter weight substitute materials that are going to protect you. Mobility, the guys have already sort of touched on. Mobility is a huge advantage and a tool for us. So anything that really binds you is going to be of detriment to you. And actually, one thing that I would mention on that is specifically with regards to body armor, a lot of people misjudge where your kidneys actually are located. And so you see a lot of people that have a cuirass that's like from shoulder to hip. But one trick that you can do is actually your bend point is the bottom of your rib cage, and your kidneys go down just an inch below that. So realistically, like, your body armor doesn't need to go down so far that you're completely immobile in the torso. You should make sure that it's not cut too low, because you don't want to be in a metal tube. And I highly recommend having your hip points covered, especially if you are somebody that doesn't have a lot of natural padding, because getting hit in the hip sucks. So I actually have floating plastic hip plates that place into my gambeson. Yeah, I've got my shoulder points covered. And that's my next point is your armor should protect you with that mobility. So if you're getting hurt, that's going to be a detriment to your training, which means you need to add something. But it doesn't mean it needs to weigh you down. So experiment with things, try new stuff. Specifically with regards to authentic kits though, if you are going for a really, really authentic suit of armor that's, you know, authentic materials, authentic weight, be aware that that will be a handicap to your fighting if it's overly heavy, if it's weighing you down, if it's not mobile. So that's really up to you. But I know for me, especially, when I was coming up, I wasn't particularly strong. So it was easy to sort of get gassed out by having too much gear. And I think especially for smaller people, you usually get given extra stuff because people want to protect you. But the more armor you lay on top, the more likely you're going to get hit sometimes because you just get weighed down. I wanted to touch on the sword length and just reiterate this. Your sword really, again, is ephemeral. You're going to go through heaps of them. So if you want to try different lengths, that's cool. I love thrusting tips. I know there's some bad stigma, and I'm sure heaps of people will be yelling at the screen going, you know, if you can't throw a blow, don't get a thrusting tip. Thrusting tips are for accomplished fighters, something like that. But honestly, it is part of a tool. Real swords have thrusting tips. They could thrust. There's nothing wrong with thrusting tips. So I don't really understand that stigma. I do understand when people just like machine gun thrust. That's bad. But don't be afraid of them, and certainly try new things. If your trainer gives you a different size tool or a weight to try and fix something, 9 times out of 10, there's something to learn there, but it might not be what is good for you as a fighter throughout your fighting career. So don't be afraid to change things out. It's not a loyalty thing. If you say, look, I just want to go for a standard 36-inch sword, which I, in fact, use a 36-inch sword with a thrust, and I find that fine. And remember, you don't have to compensate with length, because, again, if you actually move offline, you will find that, you know, if I can't reach you here, I could probably reach all of those openings by just stepping off the central line. It brings the targets a little bit closer, so you don't have to get a longer sword to try and reach things from the front.
I thought of something that was when I was coming up, it was a very, I don't know, tough guy mentality, right? And the guys who were teaching a lot of the younger guys were like, you know, spalders are for, you know, weaklings and stuff like this. I will tell you, buy spalders. Guys, protect your joints. I am now 50 and have been doing this for 30 years. And I know for a fact that my shoulders took an unnatural amount of crushing that a person should never have to encounter because I just thought I was being a tough guy, right? And don't be a tough guy. Like, it's okay to wear protective gear. Cover your shoulders. Make sure that your elbow protection is good. Guys, it's you have to do this. You want to do this for a long time, right? The other thing about kind of taking care of yourself and your gear is that when you do get hurt, because this is an activity that you get hurt doing, please, for God's sakes, take the time to actually heal, right? Go and it's gonna be 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever, right? But fighting's still gonna be here. Allow yourself to properly heal, so that way your wounds don't become kind of a niggling injury that you have over your entire fighting career, thus shortening your fighting career. So be thoughtful, recognize that and it's hard because you want to be there. You're enjoying the moment and the fighting and all that stuff. It's super important that you take care of yourself. And so when I started, like it was like a shit on if you had spalders, right? Because you don't look cool. But in reality, I now tell my squires, the first thing I say is like, go buy spalders, right? Go buy shoulder protection, and try and it's going to extend their fighting career a little bit, right? Armor is there to protect you. It's okay to wear armor. Be thoughtful about that. I mean, if you can, use period materials. Nowadays, there's so many great armorers out there that are making spring steel, armor, which is as light as almost as light as titanium, and it's historically accurate. So you can go out and have gear that is custom made and thoughtfully designed to protect you. And so be thoughtful about that. I want you guys to do this for another 20 years or whatever, right? And so, don't buy into the bullshit. Take care of yourself. Always be thoughtful about your health in this sport. Because it is a sport that is kind of, I would say it's kind of macho, where warriors who beat each other with clubs and stuff like that. But be thoughtful. I just want to throw that in.
It is actually a perfect segue. Speaking of being healthy and taking care of yourself, the topic of, I know, right? The topic of physical conditioning and fitness. And I'm going to turn this over to your Grace, Mark.
So we wanted to throw this in at least briefly because one of the questions that I get asked the most by smaller fighters is not even should I lift weights, but how should I lift weights for the SCA? You don't need to. And I say that as somebody who loves lifting weights. I do resistance training 3-4 times a week. But I have almost never met a person, I'm not going to say never, but I've almost never met a person whose baseline physical strength was so below average that it was a detriment to their fighting. For those who are interested, I included on the chart, on the doc that we did, a chart from one of the athletic websites that talks about kind of some average trained and optimal strength levels for different things. And it's things like optimal for a male to be able to do 30 push-ups, to do 5 pull-ups. For women, it's 5 push-ups and 1 pull-up. A percentage of your body weight squat. These are not super high numbers. Most people just walking around can hit those numbers with no training. So if you're curious about, is my physical strength a limiting factor in my fighting? My answer to you would be no. It's a technical thing. It's technique. But if you are concerned, you can go look at that chart, or there are other ones out there. What are kind of the average strengths? If you would like to lift to make your fighting better, that's great. I'm not discouraging that at all. But Mr. Olympia will lose to a good fighter with better technique and timing. It doesn't matter how strong or how ripped they are. So I just want to throw that out there. Cardio can be a little different. And if cardio can be a detriment to your fighting, there's a really great saying that fatigue makes cowards of us all. Anybody who has fought or done other athletic endeavors know there's a point you hit where your body just won't do the things you're telling it to do. I know that when I was boxing, there would be times that it would feel like a tunnel would close down and all I would see would be this tunnel, and my chest hurt and my arms just wouldn't obey me anymore. In SEA fighting, because particularly tournament fighting, because we do the short bursts, frankly, the aerobic.
It's anaerobic, yeah.
Yeah, the aerobic demands of SEA fighting are not particularly high, particularly compared to other combat sports that are out there. But if you want to do kind of a self-test, if you go jog around the block and see if you can jog a 10 or 11 minute mile. And if you can't, I would say, okay, your cardio is probably could be a detriment to your fighting. go jogging a couple times a week, ride an exercise bike a couple times a week. But frankly, conditioning, fatigue in combat really has more to do with relaxing and experience. I guarantee there are 50, 60-year-old Dukes that don't run or ride an exercise bike, and they will run a 20-year-old athlete into the ground because they are more relaxed when they're doing. So my personal hierarchy of prioritization for SEA fighting, when you throw fitness in there, fighter practice, skill practice has to be number one. After that, do some cardio. After that, do some lifting. I can talk about what I do, but I don't want to represent myself as a personal trainer because I am not. So I focus on compound lifts and I focus on movements rather than muscles. So we focus a lot on horizontal push and pull and vertical push and pull because those are big motions. And then we focus on a quad dominant exercise like a squat, and then a hip hinge like a deadlift or a glute bridge. So I think if you're not trying to be a bodybuilder, and I'm not, obviously, my focus is on movements, and I'm pretty strong. At 185, I pretty recently pulled a 500-pound deadlift, so I'm not weak, but in elite strength circles, I'm nothing. And certainly there are big SEAers who don't work out that are just naturally stronger than I am. So if you are somebody who's struggling to land shots with power, or struggling with some of the things, you're like, I will go to the gym and that will fix my fighting. I do not think that is true. It can help, and if you're in better shape, you can practice longer, and practicing longer will fix your fighting. But I don't want people to think that lifting weights is magically going to make them a better fighter, because it's not. And just to kind of connect that with the taking care of yourself that Thorfinn was talking about, if you're injured, go see a professional. Don't just post on the message boards or talk to your buddies, and go do your rehab.
Real fucking doctor.
Yeah, and please do your rehab, as frustrating as it is. And I've been injured. I actually have had two ruptured discs in my back and had to do a significant amount of rehab. And I still do a lot of mobility work in my hips and my back to keep me as pain-free as I can be. But I think that I would have done better if I had done those things in my 20s and not in my 30s, because I was stubborn and just wanted to keep fighting. So I'm happy to talk about specific fitness things, but I just really wanted to throw that out there. Go work out if it makes you feel good. Go work out if you want to be in better shape so that you can train longer and train better, but don't work out because you think it's going to make your shots land better or just magically make you a better fighter, because that's going to be frustrating. And if you have to prioritize something, prioritize skill training. So that's all I got right now.
So I'm going to echo a lot of what Mark said without echoing it, because we come from a similar school of thought. But what I did want to talk about was more experience-based for myself as well, because I said before, like when I first started in the SEA, I was 16. I was like the chubby nerd kid. So I wasn't particularly fit. I had no upper body strength, and I really struggled to get that power. And I stayed in the same kind of like physique for probably my first 3 years of fighting. So I was not an elite warrior at that time, but I did develop good power. And so I can't stress enough that, going to the gym is not going to fix any of your power problems, really. Like, good technique will give you relatively effortless power, as opposed to trying to muscle things in with what essentially, if you're a smaller physique human being anyway, is always going to be lower upper body strength anyway. So, the nice thing about going to the gym, though, is that you'll get fitter, which means it's easier to carry your armor, which means you can go to fighter practice more. And that's what I would say is emphasis on go to fighter practice more, fight more. The more you fight, the more you learn, the better you'll become. Lifting weights will not make you a better fighter. It just makes fighting a little easier, maybe. But I did go through a period when I first started going to the gym where I got down to my lightest, which was 152 pounds. And that was probably about 5 years into my fighting career. And I was still hitting just fine at that lower body weight. I managed to lose like 26 pounds in 12 weeks or something like that. So no muscle whatsoever, by the way. It was just all fat loss. And so had no problems with proper technique, hitting people just fine. And since then, I do go to the gym, but it's really more for aesthetics more than anything else. I put on a lot of muscle. And again, it just makes it easier for me to go to fighter practice to maintain my gear. At my happiest training, I was going to fighter practice and training 3 times a week. And certainly having the extra fitness to just maintain that made things a lot easier. What I would say is Mark said you should be able to jog the 10-minute mile. I actually hate jogging and I can't do that. So the irony is I'm pretty fit. I don't really gas out when I'm fighting. But having said that, you know, we could all be better. One of the things that I do, because I find it more fun, because I tend to get bored during my workouts, but what I would recommend specifically if you want to go to the gym is to maybe do high intensity interval training rather than prolonged cardio, because it's more relative to what we do when we fight. Because in a fight, you're not going to be going hard for 10 minutes. Usually what it is you're in rest and then you peak in your activity and then you rest. And that peak might only be 5 seconds. It might be 3 seconds. It might be 10 if you're having a really epic battle. But we're not doing a prolonged ask on our bodies. It's usually peaks and valleys. So if that's something you want to do, that's fine. It will allow you to train longer, and that's always a good thing. But don't try to fix your problems by going to the gym. Just focus on your technique, go to fighter practice.
Okay, so gosh, guys, hold on. This is the fun part about getting older is you need reading glasses. So, and also, it's a badge of honor. You guys should be so lucky to live long enough to need reading glasses. That's all I'm saying. First off, I'm going to say it doesn't hurt to be strong. And so going to the gym and doing all these things, it's not a bad thing. It's never going to be a detriment to your fighting unless you become muscle bound, right? Like these, like bodybuilders, right? Those guys are very strong, but they're also physically kind of stymied by their own physicality. We're not talking about that. What we're talking about is if you can make yourself stronger, it's never a bad idea, right? One of the things that both Mark and Ava had stressed about, and I've thought about this for a very long time, is our activity is not aerobic, okay? Aerobic activities are a extended period of time with a high heartbeat. You know, that an average SCA fight is maybe a minute, right? Maybe a long fight would be considered 5 minutes. And an aerobic activity is, if you did something for 5 minutes, people would say you're just even getting started, right? And so so we do an anaerobic activity, a high amount of energy with low, oxygen coming in, and that's kind of what the thing is. So your aerobics will be helpful. I think they're especially helpful for practice. In a tournament, you're maybe going to fight 12 fights. If you win the tournament, 12 fights total, right? At fighter practice, you fight 25 fights, 50 fights, you know? And so it's really, that particular type of exercise is, while good, it never hurts to be better aerobically, guys, let's be honest. It's not really going to change that much about your SCA experience, because we're not doing an aerobic activity. I would say things that are going to really help would be lunges. Lunges are a core and leg strength. So when we talk about moving through these threat zones that we talked about earlier, having the thigh strength and kind of the core strength to actually be able to rapidly move through them, that would be good. And so what I do is, and I'm going to tell you guys what I try to do. How about that? What I try to do. And I'm going to tell you guys, I know that a lot of you guys are out there right now in shelter in place, and shelter in place is fucking bonkers. We're out here, it's hard to do things that you think are good every day when everything in the world is dragging you down, right? And so what I'm going to tell you is that I'm not going to say I do this every day. What I'm going to say is that I try to do these things. And this is something that we can all do. We can all try to better ourselves, right? So what I like to do is I like to take, I do 100 blows. I talked about this earlier, I think, the 100 blows drill on the Pell, where I try to throw 100 perfect shots. And it doesn't have to be fast. It just has to be done right. You're building muscle memory. Muscle memory will then pay out so much more on the back end, guys. So the idea that your body now knows how to do these things allows you to come into the fight, well, like I said earlier, with a clear mind, because you've built the muscle memory so you can just react or create in the moment. You don't have to have like I'm going to do this, then this type of mindset. As soon as you start doing that, we're talking very, very small, a bit tiny seconds, like a portion of a second. But in a fight, those things can be quite real, right? And so learning muscle memory is huge. So take time to go out and try to go to the Pell. And when I say that you have to do the century drill, that's 100 blows for 100 days, you have to do it before dawn, right? But let's say you fail. And let's say you did 22 days and you failed, right? Well, you know what tomorrow is? Day one. And it's okay. Okay, so I'm not telling you that like it's a failure. What I'm saying is it's okay to start again. To maintain, you should think to yourself, what can I do to feed my my becoming, I think the guy's knocking at the door, our excelling in our activity. And so what that part of that is I think a lot of it is actually, taking that time. After I do the 100 blows, I do shield lifts. And so what I do is I take my shield and I hold it as low as I can, and I lift it as high as I can. And I'll do this 50 times, right? And then I push it out 50 more times, right? So my body is still remembering all of these activities while I'm not being able to fight right now. I can't go to fighter practice. I can't go and train with my friends. My body is still learning, and remembering these motions, and keeping that strength, right? So I like to do it with equipment that I actually use. So use your real shield, use your real sword, feel that, right? Those are really, I think, important things. And the other thing I do is I do shield lunges, where I'll take and I'll step like 20 or 30 times, with each aside on my shield leg. So that helps. But I'm going to tell you guys, Mark and I have a very different mindset about physicality, as you guys can probably well tell. I mean, I think Mark wears a medium shirt and I wear an extra large, and we're the same size. But I will tell you that Mark his body is a temple, and he respects it and that way. Mine is more like an amusement park, and so I am like I'm like arms in the air, just whoosh whoosh whoosh, right? And so I won't tell you that don't necessarily follow my style, but I will tell you that I think that there is a great middle ground that you can find between the two of us, and everyone here can do little things to make their fighting while we're still in lockdown, and be thoughtful that way. And so I like to make like a flippant story because it's fun, but what I mean is that we all have an option right now that we have while we're here by ourselves. We can do things to make ourselves a better fighter. And so it's the little things. It's maybe go and do those 100 blows and try and do them. Like I said, I understand that every day is different in lockdown, and maybe some days are fucking awful and you can't get off the couch. That's okay. All right. So tomorrow we start again. And so that's it. I think that was my physicality thing.
Okay. So I wanted to jump back in a little bit. I've been trying to resist my fitness geek urges, but I'm gonna give myself permission to fail a little bit. I do disagree a little bit with what Eva and Thorfinn said regarding cardio. So not to get too much into it, but there are different energy systems in the body. There's lactic, there's alactic, and you should train all of them. So a mix of steady state and high intensity cardio is really going to be best, because if you have no cardio capacity, you're not gonna be able to do high interval stuff very well.
Oh, sure.
So my routine currently, I'm lucky enough that I have a decent home gym. So I'm doing like what we're doing right now is a push-pull leg split. So I'm doing 3 sets of 20 incline push-ups with the 60-pound weight vest. And then we're doing pike push-ups where you're doing a handstand and then you're doing push-ups. And then we're doing some band laterals, and I'm doing weighted dips. I have the 60-pound vest, I'm doing dips. And then we have some isolation work. And then the finisher for me on Mondays is Tabata medicine ball throws. I have a 30-pound medicine ball, and I set the Tabata timer, and you throw it up for 20 seconds, rest for 10 seconds. You do 8 cycles of that, and then you try very hard not to puke. So essentially I do a lot of strength training and then a Tabata finisher. Tuesdays and Thursdays are my steady state cardio days. So I just do 30 minutes on the exercise bike and call it good. Wednesdays are leg and sprint day. So I was complaining to Thorfinn before the video started. I have a sled, so I can pile about 200 pounds on the sled, and it's got a chain on harness, and I run 25-meter sprints with the sled on me. And I'll do 12 sets of those. And then I put on the 60-pound vest, and I do 100 box squats, where I have a box that's slightly below knee level, and I'll do 100 of those. Fridays is pulling, so we're doing overhead pulls, and then 3 sets of pull-ups with the weighted vest. And then we do some face pulls because I have to make sure that my shoulders stay healthy. And we do some band curls and things like that. And then the Tabata on Fridays is sledgehammer. So it's the same thing, 20 minutes of all out work with a 10-second break, hitting the tire with the sledgehammer as hard as I can. Again, crawling back to the house, trying not to puke. And then Saturdays and Sundays are whatever cardio day I feel like. Sometimes I hit the punching bag for 6 rounds. Sometimes I'm lazy and I just do the exercise bike again. And then for me, after dinner, every day is Pel work day. So I go out and I'll do the 1 through 6, and I'll do kind of the setups that I like. Right now I'm doing Ligand Sword 6 sword and buckler plays with the long sword. So I kind of split it up a little bit, but I try to make sure that I hit the strength training, the steady state cardio, and the high interval stuff throughout the week, so that I kind of cover all my bases really. And then I do the Pel work as well. And I don't necessarily count the number of blows, although the century drill is a really good one. I just try to work on all the things I'm working on. So like I said, I basically joke that I work out so that I can fight better and look good naked. Those are really, health honestly is kind of a distant third, but I am in my 40s now, so I'm a little more aware of it. So I try to warm up a little bit more than I used to, and I stretch all the time. I was pretty bad about that in my 20s. So again, you don't have to do all that. That I think for most people in the SCA would be considered kind of an extreme routine. But if you're interested in working out and making sure you hit those motions like Thorfinn's talking about with the core and the lunges, or what I said with the vertical push and pull and horizontal and leg stuff. And none of that will hurt. I love working out and I love being strong. I'm just saying that if my technique sucked, I still wouldn't be able to kill anybody. So I just, that's my fitness geek rant, and I'm gonna stop there.
I would like to add in, sometimes I eat this muesli in the morning. And I really like it. It's really quite nice. But I'm not going to do any of those things. So those things seem fucking awful. And so like again, remember Mark's the tempo, and I'm over here. All right. So also, mad respect, bro. I can't even, what I think? I think in the morning, I think the first thing when I get up at 11 a.m. is that I should probably check to see if my lady has coffee. She's always made coffee, and so I don't have to really worry about it. And then I think to myself, do I microwave the coffee or do I make new coffee? So that's kind of like what I do. There's also a thing where I love to throw these in. So after Mark runs up and down a hill, dragging 250 pounds, right, with a 60-pound weight vest, which is a thing that you can apparently buy. Like, what kind of torture device is that? But at the end of it, he then will like stop and he'll hear like a squirrel or something will run into a tree, and because he can speak to squirrels, and he'll just like he'll like look at him and he's like, "Is there a whale in the ocean that I need to help?" And he's just whoosh, and he flies the fuck away, right? Wearing a cape, right? A cape that he also was wearing while he was doing his 60-pound, 250-pound drags. And the worst part is he stops to yell, "Thorfinn, you're fat!" And I'm just like, "What the fuck, bro? I was just making coffee," right? And then that's my life. Welcome to my life, guys.
See, Thorfinn, I'm like the good in between because, I'll go to the gym 4 times a week. I get personal training twice a week, but then I also like have a few drinks on Saturday because that's good for the soul.
It is good for the soul, right?
What? I
will tell you something though. Ironically, I started doing, okay, so I used to be a gym rat, right? In my 20s. I was a 2 time a day at the gym, right? Bent 250 and all that kind of shit, right? But I remember, no joke, I was waiting between sets, right? And as you do, you're sweaty and gross, and you got your little stupid gloves on, and you're standing there staring in the mirror going, yeah. And then I went, I fucking hate coming here. I hate everything about the experience. I hate coming, and I was doing for 3 years, I was 2 times a day at the gym. And I remember being like, I hate this place. And so it made me stop. And that's what kind of when I transitioned to doing SCA full time. So that was a nice little thing. But don't be like me, is my point. Instead find the middle ground between Ava and Mark and do those activities, guys, because I think it's gonna make your fighting better. But yeah, so I started back is my point. As I went to the gym and I was working out several days a week and I was making good progress. I was really happy with it. And then they go, "You can't go to the gym because it's completely covered in coronavirus." And I was like, fuck, really? I mean, right? So I finally decided to do it, and then there's a worldwide pandemic. I'm like, cool.
Hey, just like fighting, the gym will be there when this is over.
It will be, and I'll be back at it. And so it's one of those things. Oh, also, I did add, by the way, guys, I have a 5-pound weight that I have to lift before I can have a tiny shot of Baron Jaeger. So while you guys thought you didn't understand that I did 5-pound weight like this, and then now I can be like, "Oh, I love this little Baron Jaeger," like that. That's what I did. So, all right, let's. But before I torpedo this entire fucking thing, let's do other activities. I don't care. Questions now or something.
I mean,
like that.
how do you even follow up after that? I mean, how do you do that? How do you follow that? You can't. All right, we do have a couple questions though. One specifically for our 5-pound weight lifting shot taker. They would like to hear your thoughts on possibly having a plan when you come into a fight. And you mentioned there being no plan during a fight. So how do you do that? How are you aware or prepared for your opponent's skill set? Are you present in the moment at the same time? What is your process?
Okay, so this is a complicated thing, what we're going to talk about. And I have to move the 5-pound weight away. Really what it comes down to is that we talked about some ideas earlier about having trust and faith in your fundamental skills. Ava and Mark both really were saying how you had to work on them. Okay, so the point is you work on your fundamental skill set, thus allowing you to have the free mind. Now, this is now we're going to get crazy. Okay, so I'm going to switch to a kind of bunker mode. You should never have, once you've learned your fundamentals and have trust in your fundamental skills, which this is all due to practice. You have to go to practice. You have to learn. And this is fighting at the Pell. This is fighting at fighter practice. This is going to wars, everything, right? So all of these things kind of build on each other, right? To where you have a set of skills that you can trust, right? And when I say I don't have a plan, is that what happens is if I am in the zone, and this is not every time, guys, this is something even I work on, right? I come into the fight, right? If I'm in the zone, all I'm going to do is I'm going to present my defense and offense and just be present, right? The idea of being present means to stop caring. One of the most important things about what I say stop caring is stop caring about winning. I cannot stress to you how important making the jump to being a better fighter is once you stop caring about winning. Winning it's somebody's going to win. There's only two people in the fight, someone's going to win, right? So if you knowing that, you can hopefully learn to stop caring about it and transfer all of that onto your opponent. Right. And so what I mean by that is if you can stop caring about winning, I guarantee you they're worrying about winning. So that person over there is thinking, oh, it's super important. I want to do this activity. I want to get knighted. I want to whatever. I want to win crown for my lady or whatever. Right. As soon as you can just shed all that. Right. And come into the fight blank. What I mean by that is like you have nothing there. Right. You are 100% right now. You're writing in the moment. This allows you to then adapt to whatever they do, right? Trusting your skill set that you've built. And so I think this is a huge step. And it's, like I said, it's very difficult to do because everybody wants to win. Everybody's fretting about winning. So instead, what you need to do is start to try and picture winning as a byproduct. Someone is going to win. If you, like I said, if you can transfer the weight to that person, then they can over there, and they're over there thinking like now they've got their battle plans and all this crap like that. I don't have a plan. I think when I'm in the zone, right, I'm doing what I mean by in the zone is I'm actually focused and in tournament skill level. I don't have any plan, right? And like I said earlier, fighting is jazz, so it's going to be different every single time. So I allow myself to just be there, present yourself, and then if they do something or they leave a blow open or whatever, you can then do that kind of transitioning shot we talked about, right? And then move into your kill blow or whatever. But if you go into this with like a big game plan, you're going to fail because here's the deal: as soon as they don't do the thing you think their game plan is, like you've watched this guy fight 100 times, and as soon as he doesn't do that opening blow that you always expect him to do, now you're like behind the game, trying to play catch up versus just being there, right? So then whatever he does doesn't matter, right? You can then create in the moment what you need to do, and so. This is like I said, it's a bunch of crazy Jedi hippie bullshit, and I love it, and I could spend way more time talking about it. What is it called? Instant message me. I don't know. But seriously, it's not the thing is that it's being trusting in your own set of skills. And this is why practice is important. This is why the Pell was important. Learning to have a set of fundamental skills that are so locked in that it doesn't matter what any fighter does. Because when you travel abroad, like let's say you go to Penzig, right? And those guys fight a different style, right? You don't have like, you're not saying like, oh, they always do this because this is how we do it at home. What it is, you're literally saying that I'm willing to see what this person does and adapt to it right now organically, and that's a huge step for a fighter to do. Any fighter that wants to become like like a top-notch fighter, they have to be able to fight anyone with any style. And so this is why learning the fundamentals, I mean, and just drilling them, guys, just drilling them into your body. This is all muscle memory. It's all, you know, and then once you get there, all that muscle memory locks in. And then what happens is you hopefully, if you can apply the idea I said earlier about not caring, then now suddenly you're free. Your fight is free, right? And you can then just fight organically, and it's really hard to do. Some of us never get there, and I who you know, just spent 20 minutes talking about it, I struggle with it too. If I'm not in my training, if I'm not in those things, there's like all this kind of baggage that kind of starts to catch up with you, right? So, but when you can, it's the place to be. And so the free mind fighter is, I think, the best fighter.
I just have to bring up one little comment. Jarl Thorfinn, you just received a shout out from His Majesty of Atlantia. Duke Anton said that was a great analysis of fight strategies. So thank you for sharing that with us. We do have some more questions, unless somebody else would like to comment before we move on to the next question.
I have a little something actually. So I'm very similar to Thorfinn, particularly when I go out into a tournament or a fight I want to win. So I don't really care who the other fighter is. Like, I'm not. His Majesty Uther can remember any fight he's ever done, and he catalogs the shots and the fights. I'm not that person at all. So when I go out, I observe my opponent to make sure I don't walk into anything stupid. But I essentially have faith that my offense will happen, that it will do its thing. So I don't really have a plan, and I don't even look at what the opponent's doing and think about it. I observe, and essentially, because I've drilled it so much, it's almost a faith-based thing. I believe that my fight will happen.
You have to have belief in that.
Yeah,
that's key.
And I've had too many experiences where I go out, and I think I talked about this with you before. You know, my best fights, I exhale and the fight has happened and it is over now. And it's not a conscious thing, but I don't ever, you know, as much as I respect Thorfinn, you know, when we go out and fight, I don't think, oh, it's Thorfinn and he's going to do this and I'm going to try. There's none of that. Now, if we're at practice and I'm working a particular technique, that's a different thing. But if I'm fighting Thorfinn, I have no thought process about, oh my God, that's Thorfinn, or he's going to do this, or I make sure I don't walk into anything stupid, and then I have faith that my fight will emerge.
Yeah, and then what that is it's the clear mind. And so one of the things I try to stress about, it's very difficult to do. It's a faith, like you said, in your own skill sets that allow you to have that. If you're over there fretting, and this is also part of it, is getting rid of all the baggage, all the bullshit, right? As soon as you can say, I don't care who wins, right? That allows you to just be this, like, you can feel a weight just drop away, right? And you are now just there to fight. And it's a real trick. And like I said, but Mark, I agree with you entirely, and I think what you're saying is that it's the faith of your martial art that draws you draw strength from, right, and allows you to then be there, right. And I don't remember fights either. Like I've known Uther forever, right, and he literally said stuff to me like this. He's like, so in 1998. You threw this one combination in this fight we had at Bart practice. And I was like, you fucking remember that? That is fucking crazy, right? I mean, like, I love the guy. I'm not saying, but I know I'm not taking anything away from his amazing, massive skill set. Yeah. But what it is it's a different type of mind, right? And where I'm more of the belief in this kind of the clear mind, and he is the analytical mind. And there is very success paths both ways. I mean, clearly, right? I just gravitate towards this style. And for me to find success with all my things that I used to have to deal with, I think the other night I did one of these the other night, so I'm trying to remember things I've said, but I will tell you guys, when I was a little kid, I was afraid of the ball. Okay, right? I was the kid that when the soccer ball came to me, I just froze, right? Because of fear of failure. And then what happened was, as I got older, I did martial arts and things, and I learned about my body, and those things led me to be into what we do now, right? But I remember that kid, right? And I was the little kid that was afraid of the ball. And when I see some of these guys, I like I don't think they ever had that, right? And so they were like, I can do this because I'm 6'3" at 11 years old, or whatever, right? And so I think that tying back to fighting frost giants and those type of things is that we've all, the three of us and many other fighters have had to figure out how to stay competitive in a sport that could easily be dominated by someone of massive size and things like that, right? Like Eva said, their angles are that only they can see. Like, I mean, like Uther knows everyone who's going bald, by the way, right? I mean, he doesn't even have to. He knows years before you do, right? And so, I think for us, it's the uphill battle of trying to be competitive in a sport where there's no weight categories, no size categories, and
Or
still
gender.
or gender categories as well, is to be thoughtful and focused on your own trust in your martial arts ability. And so I think that's my big takeaway, is that all of these things. What did Muhammad Ali say? Suffer today and live forever a champion.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So that means go to the gym. That means do those pill work. That means do all the things that suck. And then maybe always look to Muhammad Ali for when you want inspiration. So that's what I do. I always look to that guy. He's
You
go.
lift the 5-pound weight for that shot. All the things that are rough.
There it is.
Hard to
Ready?
do, yeah.
Oh, there's nothing. Fuck! I did that for nothing.
The path to success. We have another question. The question is, unless Sir Eva, did you want to add anything to that before?
I'm good. That was great.
Okay.
Covered.
Not to put you on the spot.
Was it really?
All right. So the question is, how do you approach an engagement where your opponent wants to stay right on the edge of range, just outside of yours?
I think Mark go first. Mark go first on this one.
Okay.
So this goes back to the you don't get points for killing them faster. This is actually a game I had Eva play a few years ago. Everybody has a zone of threat where they feel threatened. So if somebody wants to be just outside of my range, there's a couple ways I can do it. I can stand there and wait. If they want the fight to end, they will have to come to me eventually. It doesn't bother me if the fight takes a long time. But if I want to take a more active role, one of the things I will do is I will creep. You don't rush them. That doesn't work. But I will very slowly creep forward and I will watch. Everybody has a place where you'll see them start to tense up and start to ramp up because they're feeling like they're kind of in threat and they have to do something. And I will wait there. And if they back up, that's fine. I'll just scooch back in and I will essentially kind of work the edge of where they're feeling uncomfortable, they're feeling threat, because eventually they will break and they will do something. They will plant and throw, they will jump me and throw, they will do something. So if somebody's trying to play a range game with me, first of all, yay for me, I'm super happy to do that. But also I will engage in that mental battle with them. And it takes very small adjustments. And I just want them to be a little under pressure, a little uncomfortable. And then they will break. And then we have a fight. So those are really the two ways to do it. Is you can stay there and do nothing, or you can kind of play with the edge of their kind of comfortable range until they mentally break.
I've seen like fights that are between exceptionally skilled fighters, and it looks to the outside person that maybe they're just doing nothing, right? And I would watch these guys, and they would do like these little, but what they're doing is they're literally fighting over inches on the ground, and if you're not skilled enough or experienced enough, maybe you wouldn't notice. It would look to you like two guys kind of just awkwardly standing around, right? And then, but when I see one of these fights happen, I'm fascinated, because what I'm seeing is two experts, two like massive chess masters having this fight over the inch or two that's going to change the dynamic of the fight, right? And like Mark was saying, we're talking about, like, it's okay to sit there, right? It's okay for you, because I went through, let me look on my last page, tempo and things like that, right? If you can't control the tempo of the fight, giving it up to the other person means that you're giving them the fight, right? You're letting them set the tempo. So if you don't like it, it's okay to stand there, right? And then it's what happens is most fighters, because there is a kind of a belief of conflict, that what they're going to do is they're going to make a big step. They're going to come at you. And I've seen this happen dozens of, I don't know, hundreds of times, whatever. But so what that allows you to do then is now you are still controlling the tempo, the engagement of the fight. That guy has given up their base and come into your fight, right? And so it is frustrating as all hell, right, when a guy is doing it to you, because you were thinking mentally also there's people watching, right? And all that shit builds on fighters' minds. They're like, there has to be activity, right? There doesn't have to be activity, right? You can just go, nope. And then Mark has to go, fuck, okay, well then I have to step an inch closer, right? And then we'll figure out, the two of us, again, if this is an engagement we're willing to be in, right? And the thing is that Mark is good enough that he can do that, right? He can give ground over and over. A lot of guys that haven't achieved the kind of skill that he has, if they start to give ground, what they're doing is they're giving up their advantage, any advantage they had, right? And they're feeding it to him, letting him have all the advantages. And so it behooves him to do this, right? If you're not going to come at me, then I can just wait until you do, because you're going to, right? And so it's a complicated style of fighting. That style is and it's going to be a style of fighting filled with dynamic moments and a lot of kind of non-dynamic moments where people don't understand, outside people don't understand that each one of those inches was a loss, right? Every time that person failed and gave, right, they're losing the fight, and they're letting him set the tempo, the range, and control of the fight. And so it is frustrating. It's frustrating as fuck. I've done it with Mark a million times, right? It's frustrating as fuck, but at the same time, like, even I have to be like, I don't know how many times at fighter practice that I've stood across from him, and the fight was 3 minutes or 4 minutes of us just standing around doing what other people would think is just standing. And that was the most intense fight I had that night, right? The conquering those little tiny steps, which allows you to then present your fight, is the whole thing. And so that was the hardest fight of the night. Like every other fucking fight I had, I just gooned the guy or whatever, right? But that was insanely difficult. And so it's something that we all should work on, and also recognize when it's happening to you. Recognize when you're being drawn into a fight that guy is making you do these things. And so it's all kind of that clear mind stuff. So anyway, I enjoy talking to you kids.
Yeah, sorry, this is going for so long. I had to run and grab my phone charger. It's gone. Anyway, I was hoping that Mark would go first because I was going to say the same thing, which is, playing that game of, keep that tension on. The thing is that patience is a huge virtue. So the fact is that, Mark and I will play that game, and he is much better at it because he's much more patient, and he's switched on a lot more than I am, and eventually I do get frustrated and go in there. I play a similar game that I play at training because I find it actually, funnily enough, very hard to get people to come in and engage me, so they do try to maintain that. And if that's the case, I will usually throw something that's either like I said, direct shot to their face, so they have to cover. So something long range that I know that I'm not really risking I'm not risking anything whilst I'm throwing it. So that's where those thrusts come in, because I have an easy defense out of there. And it's something to either get them to move and respond, because eventually a lot of the time when someone is doing that, where they're waiting out in their range and they're backing out of everything you've got, you can do that back to them. That's the thing. You have the patience. But as soon as you give them something to think about, generally, if those people are waiting to jump you, you can trick them into engaging with you at that point.
Yeah.
So,
and then thus allowing you to control tempo and range in the whole fight, right?
Exactly.
That's the key. That when you get into these stalemates like that, you can pull them into it, right? It's fascinating when fighters do it. I love to watch that. I've seen it so many times where what ends up happening is one of the guys is patient enough to actually just be like, I don't give two shits. This fight's going to happen, or how it's going to happen, right? And then the trick for us is to remember our fight, right? How do you then do the 1-inch chess match I talked about, to where you can control the range, you can control the tempo, and there will be fighters who literally don't engage you. Okay, and so you have to be adaptive, but be trustworthy in your own skills that you can do this. You can move in through all of these kind of minutia, the tiny steps that's going to allow the fight to unfold. But otherwise, I've had fighters that will never engage you ever, right? And so you have to eventually take that step and be the first shot, or whatever it takes, across the bow there to get into the fight. And so I think that's part of the training thing we talked about, is that to know that you can move through a threat zone. So that usually, okay, guys, if I make this face like this, that usually means I'm done. So I'm just giving Vesper an idea. So she could be like, can I transfer to another person? Is he going to talk more? I want to do this.
Do you have more questions?
We do. Although I know we are running a little longer than we intended, so I'll leave this option open to you. I'm happy to continue as long as you would like. We do still have people watching. I think they're entertained by the weightlifting for the drinking aspect as well. But we do have a couple more questions. This has to do with aging slightly, but also applies to people that have not quite reached a certain point in their life. So the thought is nutrition. What is your day-to-day suggestion for nutrition? What's your suggestion in preparation for a fight? And what is your suggestion for nutrition during your recovery process after a fight?
Should I take that one first?
Yeah, you better.
You're arguably the only one that actually has a nutrition thing, I think. So
fair enough. Yeah. So again, with the fitness geek, I actually I log my food every day, and I track what I eat. So there's just to be not too geeky, but a little bit. There are macronutrients and micronutrients, right? So the macronutrients are the protein, the carbs, and the fat, and then the micronutrients are the vitamins and minerals and things. For me, I make sure that I eat a gram of protein per pound of body weight because I do so much resistance training. I need my muscles not to break down. And then I split the rest evenly between carbs and fat. I do best with about 200 to 250 grams of carbohydrates in a day. If I eat too much less than that, I feel sluggish. And if I eat too much more than that, I feel sluggish. So, and everybody's going to be a little bit differently. So if you're interested in finding an optimal macronutrient breakdown for you, you should actually track it and see how you feel with some different stuff. I try to eat as much whole foods as I can. So chicken, fish, beef, pork, lots of vegetables. I do start my day with a protein shake. I use whey protein, and I have a scoop of the greens mix that goes in there just to kind of bolster my greens intake. And certainly if you are a vegetarian, then you can use whey protein is pretty good, but if you're vegan and you want to be completely plant-based, I think pea protein seems to be the best option for that. So there's that. I like to have a pretty good mix. I like to have a big meal the night before, and then I like to have a mix of protein and some fast and slow acting carbohydrates before I fight. I don't like to be super full when I fight. So I will actually, my favorite pre-war meal is actually I don't even know what they're called. The McMuffin from McDonald's.
Oh, those are delicious.
That's my favorite pre-war because it sticks there, right? There's enough fat and some protein in there that it sticks all day. And then I'll have energy bars and grapes and things throughout the day. For recovery, right after a workout or a training session, you need a mix of the carbohydrates to replenish the glycogen in your muscles, and then again the protein. So that's pretty much how I do it. I don't think you need to be that methodical if you don't want to. I think if you try to have a little bit of protein, carbs, and fat at every meal, and you try to stay away from stuff that comes in too many packages, because that tends to be refined crap, then you're doing all right. Try to eat some carbohydrates and some protein before and after your fighter practice, and I think you're pretty good. If you want to supplement with the multivitamin, there's nothing wrong with that, but try to have most of your nutrition come from actual food. If you're in a rush, protein bars are fine. I do that, but real food is better. I don't drink. I think I'm in the minority. A couple drinks a week is not going to hurt you at all. That's just a personal choice for me. So that's my routine and how my nutrition and how I manage it. I'm also interested in longevity. I came from a pretty obese, unhealthy family, and I would like to make sure that I'm not that and that I live for as long as possible. So I have those things in mind as well.
I am switching over to you, Sir Eva.
Awesome. I'm, again, probably the middle ground. So I'm a real bimbo when it comes to health and fitness, to be honest. Like, I see a trainer, professionals know the best about what's best for you. I actually try to minimize my carb intake overall, but that's because I tend to pile on fat pretty quickly. So I avoid processed carbohydrates for the most part. So no pasta. I don't do dense carbs like rice or anything. So most of my meals, honestly, are like probably, like 40, 60 protein to vegetables. But I would say that drink a lot of water. What we do, we sweat a lot, and you need to stay hydrated. I have protein shakes after a big workout because I do a lot of weights, especially heavy weights. I think my max deadlift at this point is 110 kilos. Again, I weigh 75 to 80 kilos, so it's pretty good. So you want to give your body what it needs for good muscle recovery. But I think that if you're really wanting to get into that, as Mark has, go talk to professionals and read books is better than what I could tell you. And what I would say is if you do keep to a lower carb diet, you're going to need to think about carbohydrates before big fighting events, because I was finding that, especially on the war field, like I just wouldn't have a lot of foresight into what was happening. And then one time we were on a road trip and we went to an Italian place before a big war, and I went, screw it, I'll have a lasagna. And the next day it was like I could see everything, and I was running everywhere and I was hitting people, and it was awesome. So that's now my ritual, is like before a war I will allow myself a dense carb meal so that I have like all of the energy, not necessarily just for the body but also for the mind, because I find I probably get more hungry and exhausted when I'm doing mental exercises than physical exercises, which might be weird. But you need to fuel everything. So food for thought. But yeah, see a professional.
That is,
where are we at?
yes.
Keep talking.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
go for it.
okay. First off, wow, you guys are awesome. But I can't eat and fight. Okay, so if I eat, I throw up. And so what I have to do is I run on batteries, right? I mean, I literally, like, my fat storage and stuff like that is how I get through fighting. I'll go do an event like a war or something like that, or even a tournament, and I won't have any food until it's over. But I did find recently, in the last couple of years anyway, there's these like little tiny energy blocks of like sugar. They're like gummies, kind of power blocks, shot blocks, these type of things. And you can find some if you go to better stores that are not high fructose corn syrup, right? They're actually made of like actual sugars. And so what I use them for is I use them for the to get me through. So I'll have one every round. Right before every round, I have one of these little shot blocks. And what they do is they give me a little bit of sugar into my body that allows me to function. I can't, like I said, I can't eat because I don't know if it's stress or whatever. But I just want to throw up, right? And when I start doing physical activity, and so I don't really do that. I do try to emulate Ava, where if I know I'm going to a big event, I carb load hard the night before, so then my body can kind of use that energy to get me through most of the day. So that's kind of how that is. I'm not going to tell you guys about how I work out and stuff because I just really kind of don't. I do like it's exercise, like that. It's not that complicated, or I'm not doing a bunch of dragging around things. But in COVID, in the love and the age of COVID, right? It's hard for us to do things, and so I found, because I lost my job, I run a brewery, and so these states said that breweries were not essential, and so we were basically closed. So I lost my job, and which is hard to deal with, right? Because I ran a multi-million-dollar brewery. But what ended up happening was I found that the first week or two, I had no motivation to do anything, right? No motivation to get off the couch. I'd watch a TV show for 4 or 5 hours straight. My lady works from home, so she's in her office, 8 hours a day. So it was like one of these things where I was kind of like isolated, even though I was in the house with her. And what I found was I started thinking about it. I was like, I gotta fucking change stuff, right? Because right before COVID hit, I was hitting the gym multiple times a week and doing all these activities, and a fighter practice that was really picking up the one I run at my house was actually turning into a really great fighter practice, right? So I was in armor every week, and I was, hosting Corpo again, which, added another layer of fighting and stuff. So my brain was really engaged. Well, I came up with a reward program because I know me, right? And I don't know if this would be helpful for you guys. Is that it's like I want to just sit there and watch, episodes of Clone Wars over and over again, or whatever. But what I did was I said, I need to do an activity that's proactive. So I would do the dishes, right, and clean the kitchen. And then once I was done with that, I have to chug a glass of water. So that was like every single one of these steps ends with chug a glass of water, right? And so I chug a glass of water. And then now that I've done an activity in the house, I could then go and do like an episode of Clone Wars. And then I would have to go and do my, 100 sword blows. And what happened was I actually amped it up to 300. So I would do 100 with sword, 100 with Dane axe, and then 100 with a glaive, right? and then my shield lifts, chug a glass of water. Then I could play a video game for a half hour or so, right? And so the idea was to make it reward based, where I got to do an activity that I wanted to do or would have just done nothing to do, while at the same time being proactive around the house, right? And like I said, I couldn't hang out with my girl and just do nothing because she was working. And what it was is it was a really good idea, and for me it worked really well. I even lost weight doing it, actually, because stuff like that. But I can tell you, in this time that we live in right now, it's important that you find the ability to grab that 10 minutes to do your 100 blows. And I'm going to tell you, 100 blows only takes about a minute and a half, 2 minutes tops, right? So take 10 minutes of your day and figure out a way to make it where you reward yourself and are helping your fighting. I know that Mark said that this is the longest since he was 7 years old that he has not done some kind of actual structured training. We're all there. We're all suffering through this. And it's important that we take it seriously, and it's important that we do the right things, the hard things, right? But sometimes that means, we don't get to go to fighter practice, right? And so instead you should figure out a way for you to be mentally engaged in your sword fighting experience, right? And then hopefully when this is over, you're going to come out on top, because I'm going to tell you, like I said earlier, when I said, hey, trust me, that other guy is worrying about winning. There's a lot of them have done nothing, right? And so you can come out of this with an edge. You actually did some training, right? And I jokingly told my lady, I'm like, hey, what's going to be cool about next Crown tournament is that everyone's going to be the same as me. She goes, what do you mean? I'm like, well, I'm not going to fighter practice that much, but at the same time, I've got 25 years of extra experience on them, right? So it's going to really, play out in my side. But it was flippantly that. Remember, guys, we're all going to get through this. We're all going to be able to come and play swords together again. But the little things that you can do, like you can follow Mark's, eating thing, and you can learn from Eva about her range movement, and you can learn about my 5-pound lift I do in order to do a shot, right? All of those things, guys, it's going to make it so when you come back, you're going to be still sound, and there's a lot we can do. So I don't know where I was going with that, but fuck it. So
It was a wonderful comment to make. The fact that you all are here to offer all of your knowledge and share that with us while we can't physically be active with one another. It's really been a blessing. So we try to make the most of a not favorable situation, and that would not be able to happen without you all being as generous as you are. So thank you so much for being here tonight. It looks like that's going to about wrap up our questions. However, if people continue to post on this, I'm hoping that you all will chime in if more questions come in, or at least come back and visit us again for another show in the future.
I would do both, but also I legally can't leave my house, so I'm here. I have nothing else to do.
Thank you so much, Vesper, for
thank you.
tolerating us for 3 hours of your night.
Yeah, Vesper, thank you very much. That was very, very kind of you. I do appreciate it. And also to my my two panelists, thank you for including me.
Well, it was I had a blast. I can't believe that 3 hours went by that quickly. I had a lot of fun, and I give Thorfinn a lot of shit because I love him, but I want to say he really is and has been for about 20 years one of my heroes in the SCA. I told the story to Vesper, but I'm going to tell it to everybody else. Your words to me at my vigil. A decade plus later, every time I take the war field, my strategy is what would make Thorfinn proud of me, and I just did that. And that was the embarrassing story that I told before you logged on. It was just, and
Wow, that was embarrassing.
Share it with the rest of us.
yeah, and I think Eva feels the same way. So I was really stoked that you joined us.
Oh, for sure. Thorfinn telling me that his whole mental space at one point was "fuck that guy," changed my whole fighting.
Yeah, I didn't even go into that tonight. So part of the whole thing, like I talked about this the other night, was that it's having a focus, right? Is part of it, and I guess all these pages and with all these things I wrote down, I forgot to say that having a focus is actually really important, and part of it is like all of the things that are like this in the world. Once you can do a focus, right, and it just shuts everything down. My first one was that I couldn't be mean to people that I liked. I liked them. So I was like, oh, I don't want to hit that guy. Right. And then one day I realized that motherfucker just tried to hit me in the neck. Like in the neck, for God's sakes. Right. Like that would have hurt me. Right. And then what that did was I started to rethink of everything. And what I came up with this idea was, but like we'd go out, we do all the activities, saluting and bowing and all those recognitions and stuff. And then I would, like, when I saluted the guy, I would say, fuck that guy. Mentally, I'd say, fuck that, right? Because here's the reason. It wasn't that I didn't like them. It's just that guy's going to hit me in the neck or the groin or something that's going to hurt my body, right? And so instead, what I wanted to do was have a release for me to be violent. And what we do is a violent activity. Okay, so you have to become okay with the idea that you're doing violence. It's violent. You're literally beating a person with a fucking club, right? And so what I would do is I'd be like, fuck that guy. Now, the reason I said fuck that guy was that I knew that they were trying to hit me in the neck, right? My neck is only, by the way, an inch long. So if they could hit that, fucking amazing skill, right? But and then over time, I learned to kind of as I said, I became more of a clear mind fighter and all these things. My focus now is so dorky. It may blow your mind. Is I do this thing where I take my shield, my sword, and I like look like I'm pointing at the gods, like, like Odin. No, what I'm saying, guys, is I look at the thing and I say, Barsoom, because the John Carter books written by Edgar Rice Burroughs claim that John Carter, this is like 1889 or something, would reach his arms up and ask to be taken back to Barsoom, like Mars, right? And I've always wanted to just go to Mars. That would be the best thing ever, like to live on that world. And so for me, it's like when I come in, I just go, Barsoom. Right? And it's just everything just sheds away. So whatever that is for you, right? It doesn't have to be, something nerdy like mine. It can be whatever you can do to focus, right? To shed all the crap around you and allow it to be in the now. And that's what I do. And so it's this kind of ridiculous fucking nerd thing. But I'm a ridiculous fucking nerd, so what do you want?
I think we're all a bit nerdy. It's all right. You can't judge. Yeah, we're all a bit nerdy.
You're a fucking nerd. So just FYI, you didn't know that.
Well, thank you all again for tonight. Definitely want to have you back. I'm sure. I mean, we had a lot of people that really enjoyed it and commented and tuned in to be a part of this. So have a lovely evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
Bye.